Chapter 17. When Xiao Xian went back, the kids in the orphan cave had already returned from the river. Today's harvest was quite good. Judging from the smiles on their faces, Xiao Xian knew that two groups were competing to see who could catch more fish. "Xian, someone came to trade with you just now. You weren't here, so they said they would come back tomorrow." Tu, who was sitting next to Xiao Xian and weaving straw rope, said. Back in the cave, Tu was rather timid and skinny. But during this period of time, he had become much more relaxed and energetic, and gradually became more talkative. "Okay, I got it." Xiao Xian nodded. It must be someone in the tribe who wanted to go fishing. After gaining some experience, they came to Xiao Xian to trade for the floating black block. At night, the two moons hanging in the sky were even darker. The crescent moon was so thin that only its dim arc could be seen. Looking out of the vent, it was pitch black near the cave. Only the sound of the wind outside the cave and the noises made by the night swallows flying around could be heard. Winter was coming, and the night swallows were listless. In the past, when they flew, they didn't make such a big noise. In the next few days, both the kids in the orphan cave and the people who came down from the mountain would run to the river as long as the sun was not set. They all wanted to pull the fish before the river froze. Maybe it was because the people in the tribe had never thought about these fish before. There were so many fish in the river that even though so many people were pulling fish all day long, the fish never decreased. These fish were very fierce, but not very intelligent. They were easy to pull. As long as they mastered the trick, the number of fish they pulled would increase rapidly. Fortunately, the fishing went smoothly for the next few days, and there were no creatures with tentacles. Until one morning, when Xiao Xian took Caesar to the gravel field to dig for stone worms, they found that the number of stone worms had decreased a lot. They only managed to dig up 3 after a long time. The number of fish in the river suddenly decreased as well. The stone worms had been thrown into the river for a long time before they could only pull up a small fish. Both the kids in the orphan cave and the people in the tribe had a heavy heart. This situation seemed to be an omen. "Xian, why is this happening?" The kids in the orphan cave were listless. They stared at the straw rope in their hands, as if their hearts were broken. "Because winter is coming," one of the older children said. He had heard that when winter came, many prey would hide. No matter how hard you tried, you would not be able to find them. Only when winter was over would they come out again. Because of this, the people in the tribe didn't like winter, because it was full of difficulties and depression. Seeing that the other children were still staring at him, Xiao Xian sighed. That might be the reason. This was because during winter, the stone worms would no longer appear on the surface. Instead, they would go deep underground to spend the winter. The underground was warmer than the surface. The piranhas on the banks of the river would also leave the shallow waters near the shore and swim into the depths of the river, to areas that would not freeze in winter. That's why we can't catch stone worms or fish. As soon as Xiao Xian finished speaking, the cave was filled with a gloomy atmosphere. In the impression of many kids in the orphan cave, winter was very cold and dark. Sometimes, they would fall asleep without knowing when they were sick. When it was time for meals, they would be woken up to eat something and then continue to sleep. They would not know whether it was day or night outside, just like the Walking Dead. Usually, it was fine, but now that they suddenly thought about it, and then looked at Yang Guang, who had been fishing these days, it would be strange if they were in a good mood. There was also a kid sitting in the corner with a sad face, holding the new fish he caught this afternoon. While feeling sad, he touched the fish's head reluctantly. However, with the dark red eyes on the dead fish's head, and the cracked mouth full of fine sharp teeth, this man and fish looked very strange. If this happened in the peaceful era of Xiao Xian's previous life, this kind of person would definitely be labeled as perverted and mentally twisted. However, in this world, it was all too normal. Xiao Xian covered his face and looked away, no longer looking at the sad kid holding the fish in the corner. In the past few days, Xiao Xian had taken out the hay used for sleeping in the cave to dry. Even the fur was washed and dried. In fact, They were well prepared. But no one could remove the shadow of the coming winter. What happened in the past had left a deep impression in the hearts of the kids in the orphan cave, so Yang Guang could not get up no matter what. It was only noon, but the sky outside was already gloomy. While Xiao Xian was thinking about what to do in winter, Stutterer, who was sitting beside him, came over. Xian. I want to. Stutterer held back for a long time before he could express his thoughts clearly. Stutterer had a younger sister. When Stutterer lost his parents and was sent to the orphan cave, his sister was adopted by a family on the mountainside. The tribe valued girls more, and people who adopted girls could get more subsidies from the tribe. Most of the people in the tribe would awaken their totemic power. Boys would awaken their totemic power when they were about 10 years old, or not much later than 15 years old. That was why the kids in the orphan cave and those living in the Mountain Foot district only cared about eating and sleeping. They did not need to work hard. As long as they did not starve to death or die of illness, they would naturally become totemic warriors when they were old enough. Compared to boys, there were fewer girls who awakened their totemic power. Nearly 1/3 of them would never awaken their totemic power. However, the tribe would not treat them unfairly. On the contrary, girls were treated much better than boys in the tribe. Therefore, even though they were all orphans, some families were willing to take in girls. That was why there were no girls living in this cave. All of them had totemic power. Stutterer wanted to visit his sister before winter came. He wanted to bring her a fish and deduct it from his share. He came here to ask for Xiao Xian's opinion. Since Xiao Xian started fishing with the other kids in the orphan cave, his position was unshakable. As long as Xiao Xian agreed, the two oldest kids would not object even if they did not want to. Now, they would also ask for Xiao Xian's opinion if they needed to. Stutterer finished his sentence, and then stood there rubbing his fingers anxiously. He was worried that Xiao Xian would refuse, so he looked at Xiao Xian carefully. Of course, just come back before dark. Xiao Xian said. Thank you, Xian. Stutterer excitedly ran back and dragged a fish out of the cave. Looking at Stutterer happily dragging a fish out of the cave, Xiao Xian smiled. He stopped stuttering when he thanked me. It seems that I still need to stimulate him a little. Maybe once he gets excited, his stuttering problem will be cured. Not long after Stutterer left, Moer's mother came again. The reason was the same as before. She wanted to take Moer up the mountain. Unfortunately, Moer was not willing to do so. No matter how hard his mother coaxed him, he did not relent. Maybe a few days ago, he had a big quarrel with the other kids on the mountain. In the end, Moer's mother left with a thick fur sweater and some dried meat, and then left with tears in her eyes. In the afternoon, Gu brought food to Xiao Xian. He brought some dried meat, an animal skin blanket and a coat. This is from Mai, and the coat is from Langa, Gu said. They are very busy today. The shaman said that it will be winter tomorrow, and everyone is checking the houses and preparing for other things. So he asked me to help him deliver these things. Mai's hunting team came back yesterday. They finished the last hunting mission of the year before winter, and they had a rich harvest. Yesterday, Xiao Xian saw that they were carrying or dragging enough game to survive the winter. Moreover, many people in the hunting team had stored food at home, so they would not be hungry in the winter. The warriors who came back yesterday all had a relaxed smile on their faces. Xiao Xian took it and looked at it. The dried meat was fresh and the quality of the meat was good. The blanket and the coat were better than the furs he had traded these days. It was impossible to say that he was not moved. Thank you, Uncle Gu. By the way, please thank Uncle Mai and Lang Jie for me. Oh, by the way. Xiao Xian dragged 2 fish over and asked Gu to bring them to Mai and Lang Ga. Although he knew that Mai and the others had enough game to survive the winter, Xiao Xian still wanted to express his gratitude. These 2 fish were from Xiao Xian's share, so the others in the group did not have any objections. Hey, aren't you afraid that I will take the fish? Gu threw the fish into the empty stone tank, carried it with one arm and left. Since the shaman said that winter might come tomorrow, Xiao Xian told the others in the cave that the furs had been distributed. He did not need to tell them what to do. These kids knew how to protect themselves. That night, the sky was dark. 2 days ago, they could see a little crescent moon, but today, it was completely gone. It was so dark that it was depressing. Xiao Xian woke up in the middle of the night because of the cold. He felt as if he was lying in ice and snow, so he was shivering. But strangely, when he woke up, he did not feel so cold anymore. Sitting up, Xiao Xian pulled away the straw blocking the vent a little. Suddenly, he was shocked by the cold wind that came in. Winter had officially come. With the arrival of winter, the kids' lives in the cave became the same as before. They just ate and slept. The temperature outside the cave was very low. Even if they woke up, they could do nothing but sleep. They hoped that the next time they woke up, winter would be gone. With food and a thick blanket covering them, they slept quite comfortably this winter. At least, it was more comfortable than the winter in their impression. They slept more peacefully. In winter, Gu still came every day to deliver food against the cold wind and snow. Xiao Xian felt that it was not necessary to suffer so much. After discussing with Gu decided that he would bring 3 days' worth of food each time, and then he would come every 3 days. Now, the cave was not as chaotic as before. Gu knew that Xiao Xian could control the situation, so he did not object. He even left a lighter for Xiao Xian so that Xiao Xian could light the fire. In fact, there were other things to do in winter. For example, the tribe sent people to teach literacy and counting. As usual, there would be people coming every 20 or 30 days. Winter was as usual. Today, it was time for the teachers to come again. The day before, Gu had sent a message to Xiao Xian, asking Xiao Xian to be prepared. Otherwise, the kids in the cave would all fall asleep and miss this rare learning opportunity. Therefore, when the old hunter who was in charge of teaching the children lifted the curtain and entered the cave, before he could feel the warmth from the bonfire in the cave, he saw that the children who were supposed to be sleeping on the ground were all sitting there energetically. Their eyes were shining, and he couldn't help but shiver. Because he lived in the mountain and was delayed by other things, he had not been here for nearly 40 days. Therefore, he did not know much about what had happened down in the mountain. Yesterday, he went to Gu to ask about the situation in the cave. It was just a routine question, but he did not expect that the cave had changed so much in just 20 days. Yesterday, when he heard that Xiao Xian, who was less than 10 years old, was in charge of the cave, the old hunter was very dissatisfied. Wasn't this bullying? Were the kids in the cave easy to get along with? When he went to teach in the cave before, only Xiao Xian was serious about learning. The old hunter had a good impression of Xiao Xian. When Gu explained, he did not believe it. Now that he saw the situation in the cave with his own eyes, it seemed to be different. Under the abnormally eager gazes of more than 20 pairs of eyes, the old hunter walked in stiffly and sat on the stone stool that he used to sit on. He took out a piece of animal skin with numbers written on it and checked it against the light of the bonfire. He cleared his throat after confirming that it was the right piece of animal skin. Well, today, I'm going to teach you how to count from 1 to 10. Listen carefully, I'm going to read it once. Cough, 1, 2, 3. After reading it once, the old hunter felt that the atmosphere around him was a little strange. He moved his eyes away from the scroll and looked up. He saw that the passionate gazes around him had become impatient. Some of them even looked at him with disdain. What happened? It was just the beginning and they were already impatient. The old hunter was not happy. It was the same when he came to teach in the past. After he read 2 numbers, the kids would yawn and want to go to sleep. The old hunter was so angry that he had a headache. When the old hunter was about to scold them, he heard a kid complaining, "Why don't you go to sleep in the middle of winter? Just to let me listen to this? Only from 1 to 10. This old man can't do it." That's right. Hey, old man, can you do it? Do you only know how to count from 1 to 10? Xian, if you can't do it, let this old man go. Let someone else do it. That's right. Let someone else do it. Let someone else do it. Let him go. Xiao Xian looked at the old man holding the animal skin roll and found that the veins on the old man's forehead were throbbing. How rare was that? The old hunter would never have thought that this bunch of brats would actually love to learn. Chapter 18. Of course, the person who was in charge of teaching was not an idiot who could only count from 1 to 10 at his age. Moreover, he was an old hunter. Even if he did not know much about other things, he was definitely good at counting. It was a necessary knowledge to go out hunting, and the competition between hunting teams also required numbers. Knowing that the kids in the cave could almost count from 1 to 30, the old hunter was surprised, but also happy and gratified. He loved teaching, but it was a pity that the kids in the mountain did not need his guidance at all. It was rare for him to be in the mood, so he taught with all his heart today. Now that they could learn more numbers, the noisy cave quieted down. They no longer clamored for a replacement, and the little cubs all pricked up their ears to listen. Xiao Xian mainly read the language of the tribe, while the kids learned more numbers. The most boring one in the cave was probably Caesar, who was sleeping on the straw mattress. When the old hunter left, he was not satisfied yet, and he was reluctant to leave. In the past, he would only come here 2 or 3 times in a winter, but now he had a great time teaching. Even if he wanted to come a few more times, he could not go down the mountain every day. After some consideration, the old hunter kept the animal skin in his hand. It was not the one he took out at the beginning, but a bigger one with more numbers and words. He asked Xiao Xian to keep it, and anyone who wanted to see it could go to Xiao Xian. The vents in the cave had been blocked with straw, so no light could come in. Since winter came, the cave had no difference between day and night, so it was impossible to have a fire burning all day long. There were some firewood in the cave. 2 days ago, some warriors brought it here, but it was not enough to burn all day long. Xiao Xian looked at the fire, and thought that if the cave could be brighter, it would be more convenient for him to do anything. Caesar was lying next to Xiao Xian, eating raw fish. He did not like cooked food. The fine fish teeth left behind after eating the fish were not suitable to be made into other tools. They were too small, and they could not go out hunting, so they could not use hunting tools. Xiao Xian made some brushes for Caesar, and combed his own hair. There were combs in the tribe, but the kids in the orphan cave were not interested in combing their hair. Their image was not as important as food. Both men and women in the tribe had long hair and short hair. Those who didn't like long hair cut their hair short with a knife. However, no one in the cave cut the hair of the children, so all of them had messy hair. The slightly bigger fish teeth were fought over by the children in the cave to make necklaces. It was a way for people in the tribe to show off their hunting abilities by using the horns or teeth of the prey as decorations. Some warriors would give these ornaments to their beloved girls to please them. Women would also compete with each other to see whose necklace was of higher quality and whose feathers were more ferocious. The more powerful the prey was, the more envied by the tribesmen. Naturally, children would compete with each other. Most of the necklaces worn by the kids in the Mountain Foot district were made from the horns, teeth, or some part of the bones of the hunted animals. Many kids in the orphan cave had lost their parents long ago, so no one gave them such ornaments. Every time they went to the tribe, they would envy the other kids who wore such ornaments. This was one of the reasons why they often fought with other kids in the tribe. But now, they could make necklaces with the teeth of the prey they caught. How could they not be happy? Now, they also had necklaces, which were not worse than the ones worn by the other children. The reason why these children liked fish so much was also related to the fish tooth necklaces. Xiao Xian did not compete with them for the fish teeth. He gave the bigger ones to the other children. Stutterer brought a fish tooth with him when he visited his sister. It was even bigger than the ones he had. It was not easy. While Xiao Xian was thinking about how to improve the situation in the orphan cave, the children in the orphan cave were not so worried. Every day, other than sleeping, they would sit by the fire and talk about the experience of counting when they ate. Moer also practiced his knife skills every day. He had already mastered counting, so he knew more words than the other children in the orphan cave. Every day when the fire was lit, he would practice his knife skills in a corner. He would throw a stone into the air and then swing his knife. After all, there was no night swallow for him to practice. After eating, the children in the orphan cave fell asleep one by one. The wood in the fire was almost burnt out. Xiao Xian added another piece of wood to the fire. When the other end of the wood was burning, he took the burning wood and walked deep into the cave. That day when he checked the cave, he found a stone room piled with miscellaneous things. The room was very messy. The stone pot used by the children in the orphan cave was also found by Xiao Xian from there. Except for the stone pot, Xiao Xian did not pay much attention to anything else. Since he had nothing to do today, he took the torch and went there to see if he could find something useful. Although the ventilation of the sleeping place was blocked, there were still some small cracks and openings in the cave that connected to the outside. As he walked deeper into the cave, he could feel the cold wind blowing. Fortunately, the wind was not strong, so the flame only jumped a few times and would not be blown out. Xiao Xian wrapped himself in the animal skin coat and continued to walk in according to his memory. Caesar followed closely beside him. There were many stone rooms deep in the cave, which were distributed in the shape of branches. The stone room piled with miscellaneous things was the second to last one on the right. It was quite big. The ventilation of the stone room was blocked. Xiao Xian took the torch and looked through the miscellaneous things here. Some of the items had been used before, but later the children in the orphan cave were too lazy to use them. They just waited for the tribe to distribute the food, so these tools and miscellaneous things were all piled up here and covered with dust. In addition to a few stone stools, there were also things to set up a stone pot, but Xiao Xian was not interested in them. After looking for a while, Xiao Xian's eyes fell on a round stone plate. The stone plate had a flat bottom, and the edge was 1 finger high. Was it for food? Why would he use it when he already had a stone pot? Putting the stone plate aside, he continued to look through other things. While looking through, Xiao Xian paused and looked back at the stone plate that was thrown aside. He roughly measured it with his hand, and then raised the torch to look at the blocked ventilation. Many of the ventilation openings in the cave were opened wide, which not only allowed ventilation, but also allowed light to pass through. Xiao Xian looked back and forth between the blocked ventilation openings and the stone plate. Then he picked up the stone plate and went back along the path. After adding some firewood to make the fire bigger, Xiao Xian took some snow from the thick layer of snow at the entrance of the cave and put it into the stone pot. He put the stone plate outside the straw curtain at the entrance of the cave, and poured the melted snow into it. After a while, Xiao Xian looked again and found that the water had frozen. He dragged the stone plate into the cave, burned the edge of the stone plate with the fire, and then turned the stone plate upside down. The round ice cubes inside were poured out. Some of the children who had not slept looked at Xiao Xian in confusion. They were very curious. Wrapped in blankets, they were too lazy to stand up because of the cold, so they stretched their necks to look at Xiao Xian. The fire was not bright, so they could not see what Xiao Xian was doing. It was too cold to use his hands directly, so Xiao Xian wrapped the ice in animal skin. Holding the ice, he stepped on a stone and let Stutterer pull out all the straw blocking the ventilation openings. Without anything blocking the ventilation openings, the cold wind from outside poured in. It was so cold that the children in the cave shivered. Xiao Xian, who was standing at the ventilation openings, felt it even more strongly. He felt that his face was numb. He quickly worked with Stutterer to push the ice cubes into the ventilation openings. As Xiao Xian expected, the ice cubes were about the same size as the ventilation openings, just a little bit smaller. This little bit was just enough for him to push the ice cubes into the ventilation openings. In the past, Xiao Xian did not understand why there was a depression in the ventilation openings, but now he knew that it was used to block the ice. There was still a small gap, so he just used the straw to block it. After the ice cubes were filled, the cold wind outside did not blow in anymore, but light shone into the cave through the ice cubes. In the winter here, there was no blazing yangguang, but there was still light outside during the day. In Xiao Xian's opinion, this kind of transparency was not very satisfactory. There were also many flaws in the design, but for these children, it was already very satisfying. One by one, they stared at the bright ventilation openings with their mouths wide open. They were dumbfounded. It turned out that the ventilation openings could be very bright in the winter. Xiao Xian only installed one and let the others do the rest. This time, there were many people who volunteered. Those who were too lazy to get up just now came over with blankets around them. Xiao Xian guided them to make another ice cube and install it in the ventilation openings. Then, he let them continue on their own. Every child wanted to try it out themselves. Xiao Xian decided to install one ice cube in groups of 5. If it was too high, they would use the method of a human pyramid to solve it. Xiao Xian told them to be careful not to break it when they used it. He did not know how long these stone plates had been stored here. At least, they had not been used in recent years. Seeing that there were no problems, Xiao Xian took the torch back to the stone room where the junk was stored. He rummaged through it and found 4 more plates. Only one of them could be used. The other 3 were all broken. He took out the second plate, made an ice cube, and installed it in the ventilation openings of the stone room where the junk was stored. This time, Xiao Xian could see the situation inside the stone room clearly without using the torch. The children were busy making ice cubes, while Xiao Xian continued to rummage through the room to see if there was anything else that could be used. While rummaging, Xiao Xian's arm brushed against the stone wall and found that the stone wall was covered in powder. Xiao Xian was puzzled. The stone walls in other parts of the cave were not like this. He bent down to take a closer look and found that the stone wall in this room was covered with a layer of something. It seemed to have been brushed with stone powder. He had seen people in the tribe use a similar method to brush wood against insects and corrosion. However, this was just a cave. Why would they use such a method to brush the stone wall? Moreover, looking at the situation, it had been here for a long time. When it was first brushed, it must have been covered tightly. However, it had been a long time since the tribe lived in this cave. The layer of powder that covered the stone wall had already loosened. Some places had begun to fall off. With a swipe of his hand, he could erase a lot of it. He took out a stone knife and scraped to remove the stone powder on the wall. With the help of the light coming in, Xiao Xian saw that there were some patterns engraved on the clean stone wall. A woman was holding a jar. The jar had a wide diameter, but the bottom was sharp and conical. There were also patterns on the jar. Xiao Xian had never seen anyone in the tribe use a stone jar like this. People in the tribe had always paid attention to practicality, not beauty. Perhaps the people living in the mountains had something like this. Xiao Xian thought. Xiao Xian scratched another area. On the stone wall, there were engravings of more than 10 warriors holding bows and arrows, chasing after prey. Xiao Xian remembered that Lang Jie had told him that very few people in the tribe used bows, because there were no good materials to make bows that could withstand the strength of the totemic warriors' arms. The bows that were made now were only used to set traps, drive away prey, and assist in hunting. They were not used by the totemic warriors. However, in these engravings on the stone wall, every warrior held a big bow. Xiao Xian took the knife and planned to scrape off more stone powder. He looked at the other engravings on the stone wall. After thinking for a while, he put down the knife. Xiao Xian fetched some water and carefully wiped the stone wall with a piece of animal skin. He felt that the engravings on the stone wall might tell him a lot of interesting things. Chapter 19. It was still snowing heavily outside the cave, and a thick layer of ice had already formed by the river. Few people in the tribe went out. If you stood outside and looked around, all you could see was white. There was a fire in the cave, and the atmosphere was different from before. After the ice was installed, the cave was much brighter, and there was no need to feel the cold wind. This feeling was very novel to the children in the cave, and they were in a state of unusual excitement for 2 days. They sat around the fire, looked at the words on the stone wall, and discussed with each other. Xiao Xian wrote the words on the animal skin scroll left by the old hunter on the stone wall. During the day, there was light coming in, so he could see the words on the stone wall clearly even without the help of a fire. After learning these, the old hunter would not have to teach from the beginning every time he came. Unlike the others, Xiao Xian stayed in the stone room for 2 days, except for when he was eating, and carefully wiped off the stone powder on the stone wall. Xiao Xian had moved the sundries in the stone room to another place, and the paintings on the stone wall took up a large area. When he finally finished cleaning the last corner, Xiao Xian stood up, took a deep breath, and stretched his sore limbs. He took a few steps back, and looked at the paintings on the stone wall with the help of the light coming in. The light was not very bright, and some of the paintings were not very clear. Xiao Xian still had to use the torch to see clearly. In addition to the paintings in the 2 places that Xiao Xian saw at the beginning, there were other paintings that surprised Xiao Xian even more. The paintings on the wall also involved farming and animal husbandry. There were people working in the fields, people driving the sheep with whips, there were people wearing fur coats and holding small and fancy wine glasses, people standing on boats and casting nets to catch fish, and groups of women picking vegetables with baskets in their hands. There were even some people riding horses. There was also a painting of an adult running with a child on a horse. Next to it was a painting of a battle or a hunt. This painting was longer than the others, and took up almost half of the left wall. In front of the painting, there was a tall horse, and on the horse was a warrior with a long feather ornament on his head. He was obviously stronger than the others, and his head was held high. He looked very imposing, and should be the leader of these people. Behind the strong warrior, there were several horses galloping behind him. There were also some wolves. No, that's not a wolf. Compared with Caesar, the animals in the painting had long and curled tails. A few of them even had their tails curled upward. Is it a hunting dog? Some of the hounds opened their mouths and stuck out their tongues as if they were panting. 2 of them tilted their heads to the side as if they were listening to someone. There were also some buildings in the background of these paintings. These buildings were taller and bigger than the ones Xiao Xian had seen in the tribe. Although he had heard that the houses in the mountainous area were much better than those at the foot of the mountain, Xiao Xian simulated it in his mind based on the information he had heard. Even the houses in the mountainous area were not as big as these mansions in the paintings. His sight returned to the painting he saw at the very beginning. The woman in the painting was wearing an accessory on her head, but it was not as simple and crude as the accessories worn by women in the tribe today. Instead, it was more delicate and exquisite. As for the jar she was holding, if those jars were not stone jars, Xiao Xian thought of a possibility: pottery. How long had these paintings existed? If it was about the same age as this stone room, it should have been hundreds or thousands of years. Thousands of years ago, there had been animal husbandry, breeding and other agriculture, fishing and pottery. There were also many different kinds of hunting tools. There were even hunting dogs, which were real hunting dogs, unlike Caesar, who was accidentally brought back to be raised as a poor wolf. Xiao Xian suppressed the shock in his heart and continued to look. The paintings on the left stone wall were obviously different from the ones on the right. In the middle, where the left and right were separated, Xiao Xian could not understand what the paintings were. They were too abstract and looked a little messy at first glance. Xiao Xian also could not make a guess based on the paintings before and after. However, it was obvious that after this painting, the style of the paintings seemed to have suddenly fallen from the vigorous and confident state to a state of depression. Many of the paintings revealed a sense of bleakness and desolation. There were women kneeling and crying, children standing on the ground staring blankly at something, as if they were infinitely confused. The background of the paintings was not those big houses, but the cave where Xiao Xian was now. There were no more agricultural and livestock raising, no more women carrying baskets to gather food, no more riding and shooting, no more hunting dogs, no more pottery that was much more exquisite than stone tools. No matter if it was the left or the right stone wall, there was a symbol above the paintings, the tribe's totem. The Yanjiao tribe's totem looked like the horns of a double-horned rhinoceros, but the horns were longer and carried flames, just like the tribe's name. Then, What was carved on the wall was the Yanjiao tribe. Xiao Xian recalled that archaeology classmate from his previous life had said that murals and rock paintings were usually used to depict the lives of the people of that era, or the things that people of that era imagined or hoped for. It was also a kind of spiritual sustenance for the people of that era. The paintings carved on the walls of this stone room were definitely not something that people imagined out of thin air. The emotions in the paintings were too strong. Only real experiences and things could arouse people's deeper, more intense, and more profound emotions. What did the tribe encounter? Natural disaster? Man-made disaster? Or was it a combination of both? At the end of the right stone wall, there were many palm-sized paintings. These paintings had different styles, such as the one at the top left, which looked like a spider resting on a web, and the one at the top right, which looked like a bamboo or some other plant. There was even one that looked like a mask, which looked very scary. There were plants, animals, and all kinds of things that Xiao Xian could not imagine. While Xiao Xian was studying the murals, someone called him from outside. "Xian, Uncle Gu is here. Xian, come here." The other kids in the orphan cave were not interested in the deeper parts of the cave. During the years they lived in the orphan cave, they only went to the designated places to pee and poop, and did not go deeper. They lost interest after seeing those places once. Therefore, the kid who called Xiao Xian did not walk towards him, but shouted directly. Coming back to his senses, Xiao Xian realized that today was indeed the day when Gu would deliver food. This time, Gu also delivered 3 days' worth of food in one go. When Xiao Xian saw him, there was still a lot of snow on Ji's fur coat that had not melted, but Gu did not care at all. His eyes were fixed on the air vents filled with ice, and he was still fiddling with the stone plates in his hands. Obviously, he did not expect that there would be such things in the orphan cave. Since he was responsible for delivering food, the orphan cave had always been dark in winter. He had heard that there were similar things in the orphan cave before, but he had never seen the kids use them. Plus, the orphan cave was in bad condition before, so he did not ask too much. He did not expect that he would be able to see them today. He asked the other kids in the orphan cave to help unload the food. Now that there was enough food, the kids in the orphan cave did not fight for it like before. After hearing Xiao Xian's words, they all went to help. Then Xiao Xian distributed the food according to groups. As for how to distribute the food, he did not need to worry about it. Today, Xiao Xian did not let Gu leave immediately. Instead, he asked Gu to tell the kids about the tribe. After all, Gu had nothing else to do after delivering the food. Xiao Xian just wanted to get more information from Gu, to see if he could connect it with the paintings on the stone wall. Unfortunately, what Gu said was similar to what Xiao Xian heard from the Lang Jie and the others. There was nothing he wanted to know. Gu drew a pattern on the ground with a charred twig. Xiao Xian knew that Gu glanced at him several times. Obviously, Gu had seen what he was drawing, but he did not show any abnormality. Apparently, Gu did not recognize this pattern. What Xiao Xian drew was one of the patterns with different styles on the right wall of the stone room. Gu could be considered as a senior warrior in the tribe, but he did not recognize this pattern. Xiao Xian sighed in his heart. It seemed that it would be difficult for him to know more about the paintings on the stone wall. Actually, at the end of the painting on the right side of the stone room, there was a sentence below the pictures of different styles. However, Xiao Xian didn't recognize some of the words and couldn't connect the rest of the sentence. Although Xiao Xian could speak the language here fluently, he was still unfamiliar with many words. Xiao Xian calculated the time when the old hunter would come again, so he learned the few words. He would ask when he had the chance. After another 10 days, the old hunter finally came down from the mountain and came to the cave again. He was surprised to see the changes in the cave. After checking, he found that the kids in the cave had indeed learned a lot. The old hunter was very happy. He took out another animal skin roll and taught them something new. During his free time, Xiao Xian asked him about some words. These words were not all from the stone wall, there were other words mixed in. Xiao Xian did this because he didn't want the old hunter to be suspicious. However, it turned out that Xiao Xian thought too much. The old hunter was very interested in teaching and did not think too much about other things. He only thought that Xiao Xian had seen these words from someone else, so he was very interested in teaching Xiao Xian how to recognize them one by one. After the lesson, the old hunter even praised Xiao Xian. "These few words are well written, they're very impressive. You will definitely be a brave warrior in the future." Xiao Xian just smiled and did not say anything. The words that were praised were written by him imitating the words on the stone wall. He didn't copy them exactly, but because he copied them, it carried some of the charm and grandeur of the original. It seemed that the person who painted and wrote in the stone room was also a warrior, and probably very powerful. After the old hunter left, Xiao Xian wrote the words on the stone wall from the old hunter's new animal skin roll for the kids in the cave to study. Then he went back to the stone room. After recognizing the words, Xiao Xian finally knew what the words were. "One day, we will return to our homeland. The glory is still here, and the fire of Yanjiao will never die." There was a word, praise, at the end of the sentence. It was probably the name of the owner of the stone room, the person who carved and wrote these words on the stone wall. The last sentence was carved very deeply, even deeper than the other paintings. The last few words were especially deep, which showed how strong the feelings of the person who wrote these words were. Although he didn't know why the murals were painted with stone powder, Xiao Xian was still very grateful to the person who painted and wrote these words. He admired them. From the words, he could tell that the person's situation, or the whole tribe's situation, was not good. It was even desperate, but the person did not give up. No matter how desperate the situation was, as long as they were alive, as long as the tribe was still there, it meant that there was still hope. Xiao Xian took the carbonized branch and drew a thumbs up behind the word praise. "Here's another praise for you." Chapter 20. Xiao Xian stayed in the stone room every day, learning all the patterns on the right wall. He also studied the paintings on the wall, thinking that they might be helpful in the future. Anyway, he had nothing to do. Winter passed day by day, and it was much calmer than he had imagined. In this winter, all the kids in the orphan cave stored fish, and with the food and firewood distributed by the tribe, as well as some common winter herbs prepared by Gu for Xiao Xian, nothing unexpected happened. 2 days ago, a younger kid caught a cold and had a fever. Xiao Xian boiled the herbs Gu gave him and fed him. His condition stabilized within 2 days. As long as the kid could survive this period of time, he would be fine. If his body was too weak, the herbs would be useless, and he would disappear from the world like the original body of Xiao Xian. Fortunately, before winter, the kids in the orphan cave often went out for activities, so they ate well and their bodies became stronger. The morbidity rate was not as high as in previous years. In the stone room, Xiao Xian put a fur mat on the ground. Sometimes when he studied the murals too late, he would directly sleep here. Drawing a pattern on the ground with his finger, Xiao Xian sighed after finishing one. 2/3 of the winter had passed, and there were still about 20 or 30 days left. If he could survive this, he would feel much better. Staying in the orphan cave every day made him feel like he was going to get moldy and rusty. He felt listless. While he was thinking, Caesar, who was lying next to him, moved his ears and looked outside the stone room. Then Xiao Xian heard Ji's voice. Today was not the day he had promised Gu to deliver food. Was it because he had been thinking too much in the stone room that he remembered wrongly? With doubts, Xiao Xian walked out of the stone room and went to have a look. "Uncle Gu, what are you doing?" Xiao Xian looked at the triangles he had drawn on the stone wall to keep track of time. Because Gu came every 3 days, Xiao Xian did not use the word zheng to keep track of time. Instead, he drew triangles. However, there was still 1 stroke left for the last triangle, which meant that Gu would come tomorrow. Gu stood next to the bonfire and shook off the snow on his clothes. He took out a roll of animal skin and said, "I'm looking for someone. Call all those who are over 11 years old here." Xiao Xian took the scroll and looked at it. There were 7 names written on it, including Stutterer and Butcher. The two seemed to have thought of something, and their eyes lit up as they looked over in anticipation. The names written on the animal skin roll were the same as what Xiao Xian knew. Xiao Xian called the people over and woke up the two who were still sleeping. The person who was forcibly woken up from his sleep and was still in a daze stopped rubbing his eyes when he saw Gu and the children standing beside him. Suddenly, he quickly packed up his things and ran to Gu with a grin on his face. Ge's sight paused on the fish tooth necklaces hanging around the 7 children's necks. Then he glanced at the name tags they were wearing and checked them one by one. He was usually responsible for delivering food, so he had some impressions of the children in the orphanage. However, this time he could not be careless. He had to double-check. Yes, these are the 7. Gu put away the animal skin roll and threw a leather cloak to each of the 7 children. He said, "Put it on and follow me out later. Moer, you come with us." Moer was only 11 years old after the winter, so he was only 10 years old now. Hearing Ge's words, Moer put on his clothes and carried his knife. Unlike the other children, who were either excited or envious, he calmly walked over, as if he had expected this. "All right, Xian, you go back to sleep. I'll leave with the others first. I'll deliver the food on time tomorrow." Gu lifted the straw curtain and left with the children. Xiao Xian lifted the thick straw curtain a little. The cold wind blew in and made his eyes hurt. His vision was a little blurred, but he could still see the thick layer of snow outside the cave and the path made by Gu. The snow on both sides of the path was higher than the children walking on the path. The little figures were shivering because of the cold, but they still followed Gu closely. Their footsteps showed no sign of retreating, instead, they were eager. Xiao Xian put down the straw curtain and went back into the cave. The rest of the children in the cave were no longer sleepy. They all stared at the fire in a daze. Xiao Xian knew why. After the winter, there would be a snow festival and a sacrificial ceremony. The most important part of the ceremony was the annual totem awakening. Those who could awaken their totem power would become totem warriors. Those who failed to awaken their totem power would have to wait for another year. Normally, children around 10 years old in the tribe would be sent to the mountain for the pre-selection before the end of the winter. The shaman would keep the children who had a higher chance of awakening their totem power, and send the others back. However, compared to the other children in the tribe, the children in the cave were generally weaker, so the pre-selection was delayed by 1 year. In other places, children were sent to the mountain for the pre-selection when they were 10 years old, but in the cave, it was 11 years old. Moer was a special case. After all, Moer was not a pure child in the cave. Because of his frequent training, his body was much stronger than the other children. The children who followed Gu to the cave were definitely not calm now. They all hoped that the shaman would keep them this time, because as long as they were kept by the shaman, 90% of them would awaken their totem power this time. Even if the remaining 10% failed this time, they would succeed next year. Xiao Xian was only 9 years old now. After the winter, he would be 10 years old. It was still early, so there was nothing for him to do now. After Gu left, he told the other children in the cave to look for him if they needed help. Then he went back to the stone room to continue studying the murals. 4 days later, when Gu came to deliver the food, he brought back 4 rather depressed children. Among them were Tu and Ba. The 2 oldest children, who were 13 years old, were not here. After the winter, they would be 14 years old. It would be strange if they did not awaken their totem power. The former cave master, Ku, was also 13 years old. He knew some people who lived on the mountainside, so he must have been training this winter. Many warriors believed that the stronger the body before the totem power was awakened, the stronger the power would be after the totem power was awakened. Ku asked someone to take him in during the winter. He could eat better, and he could also learn from the totem warriors. It was much better than staying in the cave. This was also the reason why Ku did not stay in the cave for the winter, but went up the mountain early this year. Don't be sad. It's just a matter of time. Maybe you can become totem warriors next year. Gu comforted the 4 depressed children, put down the food, and left. I really envy them. They are kept by the shaman, and they can learn from him. One of the children brought back by Gus said. Hey, what did the shaman say to you? The other children also gathered around and asked. The shaman, the 4 children, who had lowered their heads, suddenly raised their heads 45 degrees. Their eyes were full of admiration and awe. Xiao Xian curled his lips. Teaching? Was it brainwashing? That old faker. Xiao Xian only cursed in his heart, but he would not say it out loud. Look at those 4 children. It had only been a few days, but they had been completely brainwashed by the old faker. After this episode, the cave became peaceful again. Although Tu and Ba were still depressed, they still had to live their lives as usual. One night, Xiao Xian was sleeping. He dreamed of 2 crescent moons, the melting of ice and snow, and fire, until he heard some shouts. The shouts were getting louder and louder, and he was awakened from his dream. The shouts were not from the people in the cave, but from somewhere outside. The older children listened carefully after waking up, and then their faces lit up. Winter must be over. Xiao Xian yawned and wrapped himself in the fur blanket. It was still dark, and the fire in the cave had already been extinguished. They could not see anything, and only the children's voices came from everywhere. Xiao Xian was led by Caesar to the entrance of the cave. Lifting the thick grass curtain, they could hear the shouts more clearly. They could hear the excitement and joy in those voices. Against the cold wind, Xiao Xian looked up at the night sky. The snow had stopped, and the 2 crescent moons that had disappeared for a long time appeared again. Although they were just vague shadows, they brought some vitality to the dark night sky. Winter was over, and the sacrificial activities of the snow festival were put on the agenda. How many people would become totem warriors this year? This was what many people in the tribe were thinking when they were shouting excitedly. Everywhere in the tribe, there were people standing outside their houses, looking at the night sky against the cold wind. When these people stopped shouting excitedly and discussed the upcoming snow festival, they suddenly heard a child's shouts from the other side of the cave. Chapter 21. That line of the lyrics came true. Xiao Xian wanted to slap himself. Why did he say that? When the sun came out and the ice and snow melted, Gu and his men blocked the group of kids who were holding their tools and planning to go fishing by the river. Seeing Ge's familiar smile and the men he brought, the kids remembered that every year at the end of winter, before the ritual of the snow festival, they would be washed by the stream. They hated bathing the most. In a more elegant way, the ritual of the tribe required bathing. But in reality, the kids who didn't want to bathe would be forced to wash by the stream. Just look at the warriors Gu brought. They had to wash themselves even if they didn't want to. Fortunately, Xiao Xian was willing to wash himself. He didn't even wash his face for the whole winter. His hair was a sticky mess. If Gu didn't mention it, he wouldn't even think about how he looked like now. Xiao Xian walked to the stream and looked at it. Because of the waves, he couldn't see clearly, but he could roughly see how messy he was now. The strong warriors could jump directly into the stream, but the kids couldn't. Gu asked people to boil water in advance. Then, he scooped half a ladle of hot water and added some water from the stream and poured it on the kids who were stripped naked and pressed on the stone slabs. He also brushed them with something unknown in his hands. Every time he brushed them, a large amount of black water flowed down. These kids were almost turned into clay figurines. Scoop after scoop of water, they were brushed clean. After brushing them, they were thrown on the haystack nearby. Someone would wrap them in clean animal skins and bring them back to the cave. The animal skins that the kids wore before were also taken away by the women in the tribe to be washed. They would only be brought back after they were washed and dried. Xiao Xian's eyelids twitched as he watched this scene. He felt like he had entered a meat processing factory. Seeing Gu looking at him, Xiao Xian immediately said, "I'll do it myself. Give me a ladle." Seeing that Xiao Xian was very cooperative, Gu threw him a ladle and then focused on the other kids. Anyway, none of the kids who survived the winter could escape. The children who were brought back to the cave after bathing were told that the snow festival ceremony would be held the day after tomorrow. This was the witch's decision. No one would argue or complain. It could be seen that the old faker's brainwashing was very successful. Even though he was tortured like this, he didn't complain at all. After 3 days of winter, the thick layer of snow at the entrance of the cave quickly melted. Naturally, the ice in the vent of the cave could no longer hold up. However, once the winter ended, the temperature rose quickly. After wrapping himself in the blanket, he didn't feel too cold. Everything seemed to have regained its vitality. What impressed Xiao Xian the most in the past 2 days was that many people who usually looked like beggars had tidied themselves up very well. Even if the animal skins they wore were not good and had holes in them, they were still clean and their hair was combed regardless of length. On the day of the snow festival, the kids in the orphan cave were still sleeping. The sacrificial ceremony would not be held until the evening. Since they were not allowed to go fishing by the river, they could only continue sleeping. When the time came, someone would come to wake them up. The straw curtain in the cave was lifted. Gu came in from the outside and said to the kids lying on the ground, "Well, boys, get up. Pack up and get ready to go up the mountain." Xiao Xian almost didn't recognize Gu when he saw him. Gu was wearing horns of some unknown beast on his head, and there were several necklaces made of animal bones around his neck. The animal skins he was wearing were not the ones he usually wore. The patterns on the animal skins were very clear, and the hairs were like steel needles. They didn't look so soft. They must be from some kind of fierce beast. In addition to his clothes, Gu also drew patterns on his face with plant pigments. The patterns on his cheeks were very similar to the totem patterns of the tribe. His forehead, nose, and chin were all painted with the same pattern. Every time the hunting team went out, the warriors' faces would be painted with the same pattern. Although the totem patterns would also appear on their bodies when they were hunting, it seemed to be a tradition and a ritual to paint on their faces before the hunt. And now, the sacrificial ceremony was the same. To be honest, it was the first time for Xiao Xian to participate in the sacrificial ceremony of the tribe. When he woke up in this place, the ceremony was already over, so he didn't have any memory of it. It was a very strange feeling. The children in the cave were very enthusiastic about the sacrificial ceremony, because it required the whole tribe to participate in it. No matter if they lived on the top of the mountain or near the foot of the mountain, no matter if they were strong warriors or crying babies, they would all go up the mountain. It was a symbol of the beginning of the year, and also the most festive event of the year. The sacrificial ceremony was held on the top of the mountain, very close to where the shaman lived. Leaving the Caesar in the cave, Xiao Xian followed the shaman out of the cave. It was getting dark, and the night would come soon. The night swallow, which was active in the past winter, seemed to have realized something, so Xiao Xian didn't see any of them tonight. When they went up the mountain, Xiao Xian also saw other people going up the mountain in groups. They were all dressed up. On their heads, there were antlers, ox horns, feathers, and some other head ornaments that Xiao Xian couldn't recognize. On their necks, there were ferocious necklaces. Looking at the animal teeth necklaces on other people's necklaces, compared to the ones worn by the kids in the cave, they were nothing. The totem warriors also had the same painting on their faces as Gu. There were both men and women. Xiao Xian even saw a female warrior. She had colorful bird feathers on her head, several bone chains on her neck, and a belt that looked like some kind of snake skin around her waist. The pattern was very colorful, and her leather skirt was decorated with bone ornaments. When she walked, the bone ornaments made a caw sound. Gu said that she was a very strong female warrior, and had some status in the tribe. When the other women saw the ornaments on the female warrior, they looked at her with admiration and admiration. In comparison, Xiao Xian and the others were like weak chicks walking in the middle of a group of strong human-faced warriors. Xiao Xian also saw other kids in the tribe. No matter if they lived near the foot of the mountain, on the mountainside, or on the top of the mountain, they all dressed up like adults. It was just that the visual impact on Xiao Xian was not as big as that of the adults. However, it was obvious that the higher up the mountain, the more advanced the ornaments worn by the kids living there. The kid walking in the front with the strong female warrior was as arrogant as a fart. "What are you wearing? A wild boar head?" Xiao Xian's eyes twitched. He looked away from the kid and found that the eyes of the kids in the cave were shining. They were enviously looking at the kids wearing advanced ornaments. Their bodies were cut, and they were so tough. It was wild, mysterious, and filled with such strong barbaric colors. Xiao Xian's face was stiff all the time. This was the first time he clearly felt that he was living in a primitive tribe. Chapter 22. This was the first time that Xiao Xian went up the mountain. The higher the status of the people in the tribe, the higher the place they lived. As they got closer to the top of the mountain, Xiao Xian felt that the children beside him, as well as Gu and several other warriors, who were leading the way, were no longer as casual as they were at the foot of the mountain. They became much more cautious. When Xiao Xian and the others arrived, there were already many people gathered around the fire pit. People who lived at the foot of the mountain stood far away from the fire pit. According to the distribution of living places, the higher up the mountain, the closer they were to the fire pit. Fortunately, although they were far away, the terrain was high, so they could barely see the situation around the fire pit. How many people were there in the tribe? He didn't know before, but now, Xiao Xian had a rough idea. Everyone in the tribe had to attend the ceremony today, no matter if you were sick in bed or had trouble walking. Xiao Xian roughly estimated that there were no less than 1,000 people, about 1,500. In Xiao Xian's opinion, 1,000 people were not many, but it was the first time that Xiao Xian saw so many people after coming to the tribe, so it was very lively. There was an open space at the top of the mountain, with a circular depression in the center. And in the middle of the depression, there was a flame swaying in the wind. The fire pit. This was the first time that Xiao Xian saw the fire pit of the tribe. It was very different from what he had imagined. Xiao Xian had wondered why the fire pit was at the top of the mountain, because it was the coldest place in the whole mountain. Besides, the tribe already had relatively mature fire starters, so why did they still keep the fire pit? Everyone was full of awe when talking about the fire pit, and looked at the top of the mountain with unshakable piety. People in the tribe said that the fire pit was related to the rise and fall of the tribe. As for how it was related, Xiao Xian had never learned it from others. Now, he could only find the answer with his own eyes. The top of the mountain was large enough for everyone in the tribe to stand. The depression in the middle had a radius of 4 to 5 meters, but the small flame burning in the center of the depression was like an ordinary candlelight. It was not bright and looked as if it would be extinguished by the wind. Moreover, Xiao Xian didn't see any firewood or other combustible materials in the fire pit, nor did he see any combustible materials under the flames. Over there was the fire seed that had existed in the fire pit for a long time. There was a circle of wooden stakes around the fire pit. The stakes were as tall as a person and very thick. There was a stone basin on top of each stake. Fresh meat, fruits, bird eggs and other things were piled up in the basins. They should be the sacrificial offerings. There were also people standing beside the stakes. Listening to the discussions around, Xiao Xian knew that those people were the strongest hunters in each hunting group. Some of them were young people, and some were almost middle-aged. There were 50 people in total. Those people also had the same patterns on their faces as Gu and the others. The difference was that the patterns on their faces were not only black, but also white and red. They were dressed more solemnly. One of them had a huge antler on his head, which was much bigger than the ones that Xiao Xian saw along the way. The antler almost covered the man's entire body. Except for the warrior with the huge antler, the others were not inferior to him. Xiao Xian thought that what he had seen on the way up the mountain was already exaggerated enough. He didn't expect that there would be even more exaggerated ones here. Suddenly, the discussion around him became quiet. Xiao Xian looked over. It was the chief and the shaman. Wherever they passed, the crowd automatically made way for them. They were especially respectful. The chief also had a thick antler on his head, while the shaman was dressed lightly. He didn't wear anything too exaggerated. He only held a crutch, his back was a little hunched, and he was wearing a gray cloak made of animal skin. This was the second time that Xiao Xian saw the shaman. He didn't feel much different from when he raised Caesar last year. Following behind the chief and the shaman were the people that people cared about the most in this ceremony. There were nearly 80 children, ranging in age from 10 to 14. These children followed the chief and the shaman to stand by the fire pit one by one. Xiao Xian saw 4 people in the cave, including Imoer. When he was in the cave, those children were so grumpy. But now, they were as quiet as obedient babies. Their hair was combed and some bone ornaments were woven. Since Xiao Xian met them, he had never seen them so neat. There are so many children this year. Someone nearby whispered. Yes, there were only 30 or 40 last year. This year, there are twice as many. This is a good sign. With so many new blood joining, our tribe will become stronger. The surrounding people were talking about it, and the group of children around Xiao Xian were also whispering. They were all envious, thinking about when they could also stand in the same place by the fire pit. After waiting for a while, the preparations for the ceremony were finished. The ceremony began. The chief was called Ao, a very strong man. It was said that his strength ranked in the top 3 in the tribe. Ao first spoke a few words about last year's harvest, and then looked forward to the future to boost the morale. In his previous life, Xiao Xian had heard similar words many times, so he didn't feel anything. However, some of the people around him were very excited. After the leader finished speaking, they raised their arms and roared twice. The group of little cubs also roared until their faces turned red. After the chief finished speaking, it was the shaman's turn. The shaman was the main part of the ceremony. Nearly 80 children stood around the fire pit. They were even closer to the fire pit than the warriors who stood beside the wooden stakes. The shaman held a cane, bent his back, and stood at the edge of the fire pit. He opened his arms and began to chant. The atmosphere suddenly turned tense. Everyone kept their mouths shut, and even their breathing was careful, afraid that it would affect the chanting. The Xiao Xian didn't understand what the shaman was singing. It didn't seem to be the tribe's usual language, and the tone was strange. However, the weirder thing was still to come. With the shaman's chanting, the flame in the middle of the fire pit jumped and rolled. Without any combustion supporting materials, the flame grew bigger and bigger, spreading to the surroundings. The flame rose higher and higher until it reached the edge of the fire pit and covered the whole sunken fire pit. The flame also jumped to 3 meters high. At the same time, above the flame, a pattern formed by flames gradually appeared, becoming clearer and clearer. The flame formed a pair of horns that were connected at the bottom and curved in the same direction, one inside and one outside. The 2 horns were wrapped in flashing flames. That was the tribe's 2-horn totem. The first of the 3 flames of the fire pit, Soaring Flame. Soaring Flame, the totem appeared. Not only did the totem patterns appear around the fire pit, but the totem patterns on the bodies of all the warriors present also appeared. Everyone stared at the direction of the fire pit with pious eyes. The sky was completely dark, and 2 crescent moons appeared at the 2 ends of the night sky. But at the top of the mountain, because of the raging flames in the fire pit, the surroundings were brightly lit and covered with a layer of red. The shaman's chanting didn't stop, but became louder and louder. Then, the sound of drums with a specific rhythm joined in. There were also the sounds of bones and stones hitting. Someone was beating the animal skin drum. The sound of the drum varied, but it was different from the sound of some drums that Xiao Xian had heard in his previous life. The sound of bones, stones, and drumming. The male and female warriors standing beside the wooden stakes also moved and joined in. They followed the shaman's chanting, one after another, with a certain distance between them. They formed a circle around the fire pit, waving their hands and feet and jumping. That was the ancient dance that had been passed down since the founding of the tribe. Xiao Xian remembered the words of his classmate who studied archaeology. Many tribes have their own ancient dances, and it is also a very important part of the sacrificial ceremony of each tribe. It carries the unique ritual of the sacrificial ceremony of the tribe in a specific era, and also conveys the worship of the tribe to their ancestors. Not everyone can learn and dance this kind of dance, and it has to be done according to the ancient teachings passed down in the tribe. But now, those who were jumping around the fire pit were all elites in the tribe, and were also recognized by the tribe to be qualified to dance the ancient dance in the sacrificial ceremony. Although those movements were funny in Xiao Xian's eyes, such an honor was indeed what everyone in the tribe wanted. When he was in the cave, Xiao Xian had heard a lot of kids fantasizing that one day they would become a member of the ancient dance in the sacrificial ceremony. The rhythm of the performance was indescribably strange. The individual notes were either ear-piercing or dull, but when these notes were combined together, they were extremely suitable for the current situation. It made people feel that this was how it should be. At this time, place, and occasion, this was how the rhythm of the music should be. However, compared to the ancient dance and the special rhythm, Xiao Xian cared more about those children standing by the fire pit. When those selected warriors were dancing the ancient dance around the fire pit, the flames in the fire pit rolled up higher, and many flames flew out. Yes, they flew out. Sparks and flames flew out of the fire pit one after another and floated in the air. The second flame of the fire pit, flying flame. None of the children who were closest to the fire pit avoided it. They still stood there respectfully, letting the flames fly to their bodies. Xiao Xian stared at them with his eyes wide open. After the flames flew to the children, they didn't burn them. Even their clothes didn't burn. It was as if the flames directly merged into their bodies. As more and more flames merged into their bodies, the special patterns of totem warriors gradually appeared on some of the children's bodies. The more flames they touched, the clearer and more perfect the patterns became. The boiling flames didn't only touch the children who were selected by the shaman around the fire pit, but also spread to the edge of the gathering place. Many flames floated to the place where Xiao Xian was sitting. Looking at the flames getting closer and closer, Xiao Xian wanted to dodge out of reflex, but he forced himself to calm down. Since the others didn't move, it shouldn't be as harmful as he thought. Indeed, after touching the flames, Xiao Xian only felt a very comfortable warmth, but didn't feel burned. Now Xiao Xian was relieved. He continued to stare at the fire pit, ignoring more and more flames flying to him. The children around the fire pit were the luckiest ones this year. They would obtain abilities from the flames of the fire pit and awaken their totem power. He didn't know whether the 3 children from the orphan cave and Imoer, who was only half a person from the cave, could succeed in awakening their totem power. While he was watching, Tu, who was standing next to Xiao Xian, called his name in a low voice. Xian. Xian. What? Xiao Xian came back to his senses. He moved his eyes away from the fire pit, only to find that the children around him were looking at him as if they had seen a ghost. What's wrong? Xiao Xian was confused. He was so absorbed in watching that he didn't pay attention to his surroundings. Several children around him hurriedly stepped back, still looking at Xiao Xian in horror. Tu swallowed his saliva and said, You're on fire, on what? Xiao Xian was still confused. What was he talking about? What am I on fire? You're on fire. Chapter 23. Xiao Xian's first reaction upon hearing Tu's words was disbelief. Even if he had been staring at the fire pit and did not notice the flames floating over, he was not so slow that he could not feel the burn. What did he mean by, I'm burning? How could he not feel anything if he was burning? To be on the safe side, Xiao Xian had stared at the flames on his body to make sure that there was no problem before he shifted his attention. The people around him were fine, even the dozens of children closest to the fire pit. Now you're telling me that I'm burning? However, even if Xiao Xian did not believe it, he could tell from the way the children around him were looking at him that things were getting serious. He looked at his hands. There was no problem. There were no sparks on his legs either. Xian. Head. Xiao Xian froze and raised his hand to touch his head. He touched it but did not feel anything unusual. He touched it again but still did not feel anything. His hair was not burnt and there was no smell of burning. However, when he glanced up, what the fuck? When Xiao Xian could finally see the fire above his head, it had already spread. Originally, it was only a small cluster of flames on his head, but now it looked like there was a bonfire on top of Xiao Xian's head. Moreover, as more and more flames floated over from the air, the flames gathered on top of Xiao Xian's head grew bigger and bigger, gradually spreading downward. Xiao Xian could feel the obvious flames on his head. He could see that the hair near his forehead was gradually wrapped in flames, but he did not feel any pain at all. He also did not feel anything unusual when he touched it with his hands. He took off his fur coat and patted it on his head twice, but it was useless. The flames still maintained their momentum of expansion. The flames flew over and sank into Xiao Xian's arms, legs, and torso, but seemed to have transferred to his head. However, after the initial panic caused by the sudden change, Xiao Xian quickly calmed down. This was not the world he was familiar with, so he could not make inferences based on his original ideas. Since it was the fire from the fire pit and he didn't feel any burning pain, Xiao Xian didn't use his leather jacket to struggle against the fire. He stood there thinking about what to do next. The people in front of Xiao Xian didn't pay attention to them as they were all focused on the fire pit. However, the people standing behind Xiao Xian were different, especially some middle-aged and old people. They had attended the sacrificial ceremonies of the snow festival many times, but they had never seen someone like Xiao Xian. At the same time, the sorcerer singing beside the fire pit paused slightly and continued to host the ceremony. He could not leave now. He had to stay here. The ceremony of the fire pit was only 2/3 done. The remaining 1/3 was the most important part for him. Perhaps for the warriors in the tribe, the second flame was the most important and eye-catching one among the 3 flames of the fire pit. When the second flame appeared, a new batch of totem warriors would appear in the tribe. The hunting team, which had lost some warriors last year, was also keeping an eye on the second flame, waiting for those kids to become totem warriors and join their team. But for the shaman himself, the number of totem warriors was only a small factor. What he wanted to see was the situation of Yan Zhan, the last flame. However, even if the shaman couldn't leave, he couldn't just ignore what was happening over there. So, while the shaman was still chanting, he gave Chief Ao a signal. Chief Ao, who was standing not far from the shaman, had already noticed the abnormality over at Xiao Xian's side. At first, he was hesitating whether to go over or not. After all, the shaman knew more about the sacrificial ceremony than he did. If he acted without the shaman's permission, it would bring unimaginable consequences to the ceremony. As the chief of the tribe, he had to consider the whole situation, not just a few people. After receiving the signal from the shaman, the chief signaled the others to continue. He then flashed towards the place where the abnormality was happening. Because the others were all staring at the fire pit, and the chief was moving too fast, not many people noticed it. Xiao Xian was thinking whether to let the fire get bigger and bigger, or to call for help. Without a doubt, Xiao Xian cherished his life. If it weren't for the fact that he didn't feel any real harm, he would have already called for help. But now, the fire didn't burn him, and it was the most important occasion of the year in the tribe. Even the arrogant warriors in the tribe had now restrained themselves. If he shouted now and ruined the ceremony, what would he do if the whole tribe hated him? There was only one tribe in this area, and he was all alone now. He couldn't be abandoned. While he was thinking, he suddenly felt darkness in front of him. Xiao Xian raised his head, and met the chief's confused eyes. There were so many people on the field, but Xiao Xian didn't hear the sound of people moving to make way. But now, the chief appeared here quietly. He was just by the fire pit. The other children around were quite nervous, and their minds were no longer on the fire pit. Anyway, they had nothing to do with the awakening of totemic power this year. What was happening near Xiao Xian was more attractive to them. Even the chief came here. In their opinion, Xiao Xian must be in trouble. Chief Gu, who noticed this, was about to say something, but was stopped by Ao, who signaled the others not to be distracted. The people around quickly calmed down, and looked at the fire pit again. They prayed that they could hunt more prey in the new year, and that everything would go well. Of course, there were some who couldn't control their curiosity, and glanced at Xiao Xian from time to time. Ao looked at the child in front of him, and his heart was full of doubts. Was he going to awaken? This child was definitely not 11 years old, and he was much thinner than the children by the fire pit. He had seen all the children Gu brought up from the foot of the mountain during the pre-selection, but he had no impression of the one in front of him. Obviously, it was the first time for the chief to encounter such a situation. However, since the shaman had signaled him, he just needed to take him there. Don't be afraid, the flame of the fire seed won't hurt people. Ao comforted him in a low voice, and then grabbed Xiao Xian's animal skin coat and lifted him up. Xiao Xian lowered his head and pondered, so he didn't notice how the chief walked from the fire pit to the side of the field, but now he knew. Ao directly jumped up and stepped on the shoulders of the people present. He looked tall and strong, but his jump was very light. He carried a person as if he was weightless, and floated over the heads of the people in the tribe. Before Xiao Xian could catch his breath, he was already by the fire pit. Ao asked Xiao Xian to stand with the other children by the fire pit, and stepped back to where he stood before. Another child by the fire pit naturally attracted the attention of the people who had been staring at the fire pit. Some people wanted to whisper to the people next to them, but Ao glanced at them, and they hurriedly stopped. A young warrior who was performing the ancient dance almost made a mistake because he was distracted. He hurriedly repented in his heart, calmed himself down, and continued to dance seriously. However, more people couldn't help but feel confused. Was the child who had just been added also going to awaken his totemic power? But why wasn't he selected in the pre-selection? Was he too young? No one doubted the shaman's ability, so they only thought about his age. In addition to his age, it could be that the people at the foot of the mountain made a mistake. What on earth happened? Why was there a ball of fire on the child's head? When everyone was confused, Ao, who had returned to his original position, moved his eyes away from the fire pit, and looked down at the hand that had just held Xiao Xian. That vigorous hand that had hunted countless prey had already turned red from the heat. What did he just say to the child? The flame of the fire seed won't hurt people? Chapter 24. Because of the Xiao Xian's participation, the ceremony was different from the previous years. Even though the people in the tribe had their own thoughts, they were more concerned about the children who were awakening their power by the fire pit. Sai felt the obvious changes in his body and the totem patterns on his arms. He was overjoyed, but at this moment, someone suddenly joined him, so he naturally noticed it. Sai turned his head and saw Xiao Xian shrouded in a ball of fire. The road of injustice is narrow. Wasn't this guy still young? After today's snow festival, he would only be 10 years old. Why was he here? Looking at the man who was 2 years younger than him, Sai was surprised and doubtful. Thinking of the time when he was beaten up by a group of people before the winter, Sai was full of anger. At first, he was very excited to be asked to stay by the shaman. He planned to follow the hunting team to hunt for a bigger beast after awakening his totem, and then walk around the cave for a few laps. But now, what happened? Since Xiao Xian was thrown into the room, he had noticed that Sai was standing next to him. However, he was not in the mood to argue with this kid. Before, Xiao Xian had been watching from afar, but now he could finally feel the tribe's fire pit at a close distance. He felt like he was in a sea of fire, but he did not feel burned. He only felt warm all over, and the coldness of the winter was gone. The totem patterns on the children by the fire pit were red, as if the flame had entered their bodies and awakened the power sleeping in their flesh and blood. They were more restrained. But Xiao Xian's totem pattern was much fiercer. The ball of fire that had gathered on top of his head had spread to the bottom of his body. Xiao Xian's eyes were filled with the color of fire. He did not know whether it was the fire from the fire pit or the fire from the top of his head. Xiao Xian felt a little pain in his head, and his body temperature was rising. The heat gathered in between his eyebrows and began to spread from there to his forehead, face, neck, torso, limbs. Without a mirror, Xiao Xian could not see the changes on his face. But since the totem patterns on the other children's faces were red, he should be the same. Xiao Xian felt the heat spreading from his shoulder to his arm. He looked at his arm. Previously, because there was a fire on his head, he took off his animal skin coat to extinguish the fire. After that, he didn't put it back on and left it there. Right now, Xiao Xian was only wearing a sleeveless animal skin robe. The fiery totemic patterns on his arms could be seen clearly as the heat spread through his body. The flames floating out of the fire pit were getting denser and denser, and the flames in the fire pit were also spreading outwards. The people in the tribe were busy praying at this time, so Xiao Xian was not so eye-catching as he was covered in flames. The rolling flames in the fire pit became more and more intense. Now, the fire pit was no longer the small flame that Xiao Xian had seen at the beginning. Now, the entire fire pit was like a volcano that was ready to erupt. However, it didn't give people a sense of fear. Instead, it gave people an impulse to worship it. The shaman's chanting had already reached the third stage. When the last note fell, the shaman raised his arms and swung them to the side. His grayish-white beast skin cloak was instantly engulfed in flames. The third flame of the fire pit, Yan Zhan. The fire in the fire pit was no longer gentle like before. Instead, it was spreading out like lava. In the blink of an eye, the people on the top of the mountain who were attending the ceremony were drowned, and then it covered the bottom of the mountain. Near the foot of the mountain, Caesar, who was left in the cave, retreated to a corner. He stared at the entrance of the cave and growled in his throat. Outside the cave, there was already a sea of fire. The rapidly spreading flames covered the entire mountain, but it didn't burn any grass or trees here. It seemed harmless, but Caesar, who was hiding in the cave, was extremely afraid. If he could, he would dig a hole and hide in it right now. The night swallow, who had retreated to the edge of the residential area, saw the flames getting closer and closer. They reluctantly flew up again, and quickly flapped their wings and flew away. The shaman, who had been standing by the fire pit with a serious expression, couldn't help but show a happy expression. He didn't need to look down the mountain, he could already feel the range of the flames. It was bigger than the range of the flames in the past few years. No, since he took over the position of shaman, he had never seen the third flame of the fire pit spread so far. Auspicious, auspicious! The shaman shouted. Auspicious! The people in the tribe raised their arms and cheered. The fire of Yanjiao will never die. Chief Ao also shouted happily. The fire of Yanjiao will never die. The people in the tribe shouted in agreement. They were all so excited, as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Since the shaman said that the new year would be better, it must be. How could people not be excited and celebrate? The spreading flames lasted for about half an hour, and then gradually began to dissipate from the foot of the mountain to the top. At last, only the flames in the fire pit were still burning and surging. The totem above the flames was still there. After that, the scene was not so serious, and became much more relaxed. The people in the tribe needed to vent their excitement, so they gathered together and walked down the mountain, chatting and laughing. When they went back, they found their close friends and relatives to roast some meat and drink some fruit wine. After eating and drinking, they had a good sleep to welcome the new year. Gu also took the children in the cave to walk down the mountain. They didn't need to worry about being attacked by the night swallow. Tonight, no birds or beasts would enter their residence. Of course, the Caesar was an exception. Unlike most of the people in the tribe, Xiao Xian and the other children who had awakened their totemic power had to stay on the mountain for a while. They needed to receive the shaman's second teaching. Of the nearly 80 children, except for 4, all awakened their totemic power successfully. The other 4 children left with disappointment, but when they thought that they would definitely awaken their totemic power next year, they were not so depressed. Xiao Xian and the others stayed by the fire pit. After the other people in the tribe left, they were led to a stone house by a few warriors. This stone house was much sturdier than the wooden houses Xiao Xian saw at the foot of the mountain. It was also much more spacious. 70 children didn't feel crowded inside. After awakening his totem power, it seemed that every breath he took had become much easier. Every muscle and every bone in his body seemed to have been reshaped and was filled with strength. Even if his entire person did not look much different from before, there had already been a qualitative change inside. However, Xiao Xian was still a little depressed. He looked at the other children, who were either talking about their awakening or gesturing with their hands and feet. If it weren't for the others watching, they would have competed with each other on the spot. After carefully looking at the people around, Xiao Xian took a few steps forward and poked the person who was bragging to others. "Hey, you there!" "What?" Sai, who was interrupted, turned around and saw Xiao Xian. He didn't finish his sentence, so he took 2 steps back vigilantly. Perhaps he felt that it was too embarrassing to take 2 steps back, so he took another step forward. "What are you doing?" Sai asked, his eyes still full of vigilance. Before his awakening, he was taller and stronger than Xiao Xian, but he was still beaten down several times. After his awakening, he didn't dare to underestimate Xiao Xian anymore. "After your awakening, did your vision change?" "Vision, that is, what you see, compared to before your awakening, is there any change?" Xiao Xian asked. Hearing Xiao Xian's question, Sai raised his chin and said proudly, "Of course there is a change." The other children, who Xiao Xian didn't know, heard them talking about this topic, so they also joined in. They talked about how far they could see in the dim light. Compared to before their awakening, their hearing, smell, and vision had improved greatly. Xiao Xian was the only one who kept silent. He couldn't help it. He couldn't tell others that the people around him were all skeletons. Chapter 25. Xiao Xian felt something was wrong when the ceremony ended. He had been staring at the fire in the fire pit when he realized that almost all the totems on his body had appeared. Since he knew that all the changes that happened to him were for the sake of awakening his totemic power, Xiao Xian was not worried anymore. However, when he stood beside the fire pit, Xiao Xian felt a sense of familiarity with the fire in the fire pit. He did not know if the other kids who had awakened their totemic power felt the same as him, so he could not ask anyone for details. So he just stared at the fire in the fire pit and studied it. When the shaman announced the end of the ceremony, Xiao Xian moved his attention away from the fire pit and was about to tease his old enemy Sai. However, when he turned his head, he saw a skeleton standing next to him. Xiao Xian was so scared that he almost kicked it. Looking around, the people walking in the tribe, the warriors who had finished their dance, and the kids who had just awakened their totemic power standing around the fire pit were all skeletons. Xiao Xian could not recognize them. The ones who were talking, walking, and moving their arms and legs were all skeletons. Xiao Xian was confused. He did not know whether it was his problem or all the awakened totemic warriors were the same. When he talked with Lang Jie and Mai, he only knew that the totemic warriors would grow faster after awakening, and their physical strength and reflexes would be greatly improved. However, he did not ask if he could see skeletons. Who would have thought of that? But now, Sai and the little warriors beside him did not mention anything about seeing skeletons. Just now, the two in front of him were talking about a piece of dried meat hanging outside the stone house, and did not mention bones at all. So, it seemed that he was the only exception. He was different from others when he awakened, and he was still different after awakening. What if he saw skeletons all the time? Would the people he dreamed of at night all be walking skeletons? Damn it! Just thinking about it made his hair stand on end. Xiao Xian scratched his head. Now he could only see bones in his arms. He did not see any flesh at all. Motherfucker! As for how he recognized Sai earlier, it was because he had fought with Sai many times in the past. His first impression of him was that he was familiar with him. The second reason was his voice. When Sai bragged to others, he was not reserved at all. He was always in a state of excitement after his successful awakening. When he spoke, it was as if he was afraid that others would not be able to hear him. If it were not for these two reasons, Xiao Xian would not have recognized him so quickly. The warrior who led them here had left, and the shaman and the chief had not arrived yet. Now, there were only 75 children who had just awakened this year in the stone house. Since no one cared about them, these children had let go of their worries and gathered together to chat and laugh. In Xiao Xian's eyes, they were a bunch of skeletons whose jaws were opening and closing as they danced. Xiao Xian didn't go over. After knowing that something had happened on his side, he retreated to a corner to think. Xiao Xian had already taken off the name tag hanging around his neck. He remembered that the other children by the fire pit did not wear it. When he entered the house, he took it off and tied it around his wrist. His body did not feel any discomfort. The fire on his head did not hurt a single strand of his hair. Not only that, probably because of the awakening of his totemic power, Xiao Xian now felt refreshed and energetic. If it were not for the skeletons in his vision, he would be in a better mood. Unable to figure out the reason, Xiao Xian looked around. Other than the 70-odd skeletons, the stone house was mostly filled with stones. There were stone tables, stone stools, and stones of different sizes and shapes on the table. In fact, Xiao Xian's vision was not just a single color. On the contrary, in his vision, there were white, gray, and black of different shades. For example, the children's skeletons were white, but the stones in the stone house varied from light gray to dark gray. Because of the shaman and the chief, these children did not touch the stones. However, they could still watch. Several children stood beside the long square stone table. They were discussing the quality of the stones. This stone looks good. It must be good to make it into a stone knife. A child pointed to a stone on the stone table and said, "This one is okay. It should be close to the medium grade." Another child looked carefully and said, he did not care much about it. Medium-grade stones were not rare for him. However, when he saw another stone on the stone table that was not conspicuous and not in a good shape, he was surprised. This one is good. The quality is above medium. Unfortunately, the shape is not good. It can't be made into a stone knife. It can be made into a small spearhead. Xiao Xian looked over. The stone that was rated as medium grade by the children was gray in Xiao Xian's eyes. The stone that was above medium grade was close to dark gray. In order to prove whether his guess was correct, Xiao Xian stood aside and watched for a while. He listened to the children's evaluation of the stones on the stone table. In Xiao Xian's eyes, the stones that he didn't think highly of were the so-called low-grade stones. In Xiao Xian's eyes, the middle-grade stones were gray, and the better ones had a darker color. In other words, the better the quality of the stone, the darker the color in this special vision. Xiao Xian had an idea in his mind. While they were discussing, the curtain was lifted. The shaman came in with a walking stick, Chief Ao and 2 warriors, one of whom was a woman. When the curtain was lifted, the stone house suddenly quieted down. The people who were showing off their knowledge immediately became obedient and respectfully saluted to the shaman. When he was near the Mountain Foot district, Xiao Xian rarely saw people salute. Usually, people in the tribe would only salute when they met someone with prestige. However, the people at the foot of the mountain were all at the bottom of the tribe, so it was rare for them to salute. However, Xiao Xian had learned this salute. The people in charge of teaching the children in the orphan cave not only taught them how to count and read, but also how to salute. The children in the orphan cave could not count or read, but they had to salute. If they did not salute when they met the shaman, they would be regarded as disrespectful by the people in the tribe. They would be disliked and ostracized. The shaman had been waiting by the fire pit. He didn't come until the fire in the pit had gradually shrunk and returned to the small flame like before. Probably because he had spent a lot of energy presiding over tonight's ceremony, the shaman was still supported by others when he came in. After finishing the ceremony at the fire pit, he drank some water and came here. He didn't know much about this group of newly awakened warriors, so he didn't have time to read the animal skin rolls. After he recovered, he came to the stone house. Ao Ta, the leader who came in with the shaman, glanced around the house and then fixed his eyes on Xiao Xian. The red burn on his hand hadn't disappeared yet, and he didn't have time to tell the shaman about this strange thing. A warrior put a stone bench in the middle of the stone house, and another female warrior helped the shaman sit down. The shaman took a deep breath and looked at the newly awakened warriors with a kind look. He was very pleased. Every year when he saw the newly awakened warriors, he always had an irrepressible pride. Good, very good. You will all be the real brave warriors of our Yanjiao tribe. The shaman said slowly. Praised by the shaman, the children's faces turned red, and they couldn't wait to shout to vent their excitement. After looking around, the shaman asked, "Who is the last child to join us today? Stand over here and let me have a good look." The people in front of Xiao Xian stepped aside immediately. Except for Xiao Xian, the other children had stayed with the shaman for a while, so they had some impression of him. The only one they didn't know was Xiao Xian. "So it's you. Come closer and let me have a look." The shaman looked at Xiao Xian and said. Xiao Xian took a few steps forward and stood in front of the shaman. He wanted to see what the old shaman would say. Would he mention Caesar? Would he feel guilty for not asking about him for nearly a year? Didn't he know that it was hard to raise a wolf? Xiao Xian looked at the old skeleton sitting on the stone bench, and the shaman looked at Xiao Xian carefully. He still looked pleased and kind. What's your name? Xiao Xian. Obviously, the old shaman didn't recognize him. Chapter 26. My name is Xian. Xiao Xian told the shaman his name in the tribe. Now he could only see the bones, but he could not see the shaman's facial expression. However, the shaman paused after hearing the name, as if he was thinking about something. Xiao Xian knew that he probably did not remember it. After a while, the shaman said something, but he did not continue to ask about Xiao Xian. Well, you can stand with your companions. Xiao Xian did not say much. He did not show any dissatisfaction on his face, but in his heart, he had already curled his lips. Did this old faker have a bad memory? Did he forget? Well, since you have awakened your totems and obtained the power brought by the awakening, then the first thing you need to know is how to use this power. The shaman explained slowly. This is the turning point of your life. From now on, you are a real totem warrior. However, this is also a new starting point. How far you can go in the future depends on you. Do not be careless. You can stay in the initial stage, or continue to grow like those excellent warriors in the tribe. When the shaman said this, he especially looked at Chief Ao, indicating that this was a model for the young warriors. As the chief, Ao was naturally powerful, far more powerful than most of the warriors in the tribe. Because of the worship of power, many newly awakened warriors naturally idolized Ao, including this group of young warriors. As totem warriors, the first thing you need to know is how to find the source of power in your body. This was the main purpose of the shaman to let these young warriors stay tonight. The source of power exists in your bloodline. It is just that when you are young, it has always been asleep. One day, when the time is ripe, under the call of the flame seed, it will gradually begin to awaken. Close your eyes, throw away all distracting thoughts, follow the power in your body, and you will naturally see it. The stone house began to warm up. Everyone sat down and closed their eyes according to the shaman's instructions. Xiao Xian did the same. When his mind was empty, he found that a figure gradually appeared in his sea of consciousness. It was a pair of horns wrapped in flames, which was the totem of the tribe. In addition, there was an egg-shaped thing, shining white light, which wrapped the totem inside. Egg-shaped, I see it. A child could not hold back his excitement and opened his eyes. It's a totem. Another child cried out. I saw it too. Me too. Everyone scrambled to say one after another, fearing that the shaman would misunderstand that they could not see the source of power, and that they would be regarded as stupid totem warriors with no growth potential. The shaman looked around and found that most of the children could find their source of power, except for Xian. Have you found it? As soon as the shaman spoke, all the other children immediately looked over. When they were chatting with each other, Sai had told them that Xian came from a cave at the foot of the mountain. After the snow festival, he was only 10 years old. Generally speaking, only a few people in the tribe could awaken their power at this age, and most of them lived near the top of the mountain. They were the descendants of some powerful warriors in the tribe. There was also a saying in the tribe that the earlier one awakened, the more potential one had, and the higher the chance of becoming a powerful warrior like the chief. Before that, before the end of winter, when they were chosen to stay by the shaman, the youngest one was Mao, the eldest grandson of the shaman. Chief Ao's usual hunting weapon was a spear. Countless prey had fallen under his spear, and this spear also represented Ao's countless glorious deeds. Many people in the tribe knew about it. According to the tribe's saying, the chief gave the name of his weapon to his first grandson, which meant a lot. Obviously, he had high hopes for this grandson. However, it was clear that in this sacrificial ceremony, the most outstanding one was not Mao, who was recognized as having the greatest potential, but Xiao Xian, who suddenly rose up and was only discovered in the middle of the ceremony. Mao's face was gloomy all the time, especially when he looked at Xiao Xian, with obvious provocation in his eyes, as if he could not wait to fight with him first. Unfortunately, Xiao Xian could only see the skeleton, and could not see the expression on Mao's face at all. As for the provocation in his eyes, it was completely wasted, as if he was throwing it to a blind man. Hearing the shaman's question, Mao also stared at Xiao Xian, expecting Xiao Xian to say no, so that Xiao Xian would definitely be laughed at by everyone. Unfortunately, Xiao Xian did not let them do as they wished. Hearing the shaman's words, Xiao Xian nodded, "I also saw it. It's the same as the totem in the fire pit." Since everyone could see it, the shaman was relieved, and continued to spread the knowledge of the origin of the tinder to everyone. While Xiao Xian closed his eyes, and looked at the egg-shaped object in his mind other than the totem. Since no one else mentioned anything other than the totem, that was to say, this white egg was only seen by Xiao Xian himself. Based on this shape, Xiao Xian could not help but think of the strange stone he had held in his previous life, which could neither leave a mark nor be burned by fire. The more he looked at it, the more similar it seemed. If that was the case, then he had found the reason why he was different from the others when he awakened. Speaking of using the totem power, the shaman called Mao over to demonstrate. Give it a punch without using the totem power. Under the shaman's signal, a warrior next to him took out the stone slab he had prepared earlier. Mao walked out with his chest out. Seeing his grandfather, the chief of the tribe, Ao, giving him an encouraging look, he took a deep breath, clenched his fist, and got ready. He shouted loudly, and at the same time punched the stone slab in front of him. Bang! A muffled sound. The stone slab only trembled a little. Mao frowned slightly, and stood still, withdrawing his fist. Xiao Xian felt the pain for him. However, looking at Mao's fist, he found that Mao's finger bones were not injured, and there was no smell of blood. Perhaps even his skin was not broken. This was different from the strength of the body before the awakening. From the flesh to the bones, every inch of his body had been strengthened. Well, now use the totem power. Again. The shaman said. This time, Mao's frown loosened, and he looked much more relaxed. The totem lines gradually appeared on Mao's face, and at the same time, Mao punched again. It was the same punching posture, and it seemed that he had used the same strength. There was nothing special about it, but it gave people a completely different feeling. Bang! The stone slab hit by Mao's fist broke into pieces. The little warriors were eager to try it themselves. However, the shaman did not take out more stone slabs, but let them practice here quietly to familiarize themselves with how to use the totem power. After the lesson, the shaman left with them. He had to take a rest now. Ao looked at the exhausted shaman, and then looked at his burning palm. He thought for a while and decided to come back tomorrow to talk to the shaman. The shaman, who was helped back to his stone house, lay down on the fur blanket. Under the light of the fire, he opened a roll of animal skin, which was recorded during the ceremony today. It contained the details of every child, including who started the awakening and who finished the awakening in the fire pit. It also recorded Xiao Xian's information, including Xiao Xian's birth and his current situation. When he saw that Xiao Xian also raised a wolf, the shaman tried hard to recall. That seemed to be the case. No wonder he felt familiar when he heard the name Xian. At that time, it was rare for him to go down the mountain to see how people were living at the foot of the mountain. He did not expect to hear someone talk about raising, so he left a mark to prevent people in the tribe from hurting the wolf. He wanted to ask for more food, but when he went up the mountain, he was told that a kind of plant he had been looking for had been found. The hunting team brought back one. Since then, he devoted all his attention to that plant, and studied the medicine for nearly a year. When he finally finished the research, he did not even remember raising the wolf. He did not know how the wolf was doing now. At this time, Caesar, who was finally remembered by the shaman, was squatting outside the cave miserably. Facing the cold night wind, he looked at the mountain and wished he could howl. Chapter 27. The next day, the little warriors who were immersed in practicing their totemic power woke up one by one. After a night of practice, everyone could basically use their totemic power skillfully. Xiao Xian also learned a lot this night. After getting familiar with how to use the totemic power, he tried to use the same method to deal with the theg that covered the totemic power. The results showed that it did work. When he used the totemic power, the light on the theg would dim a little, and when he used the power of the theg, the totemic power would be covered by the light of the theg. However, no matter which power he used, the totemic power would always be covered by the theg, which could not be changed. Although he could not switch between the two powers in the blink of an eye, at least he could use the two powers freely if he had enough time. He could use the totemic power and the power of the egg separately. And the result was that when Xiao Xian opened his eyes, he no longer saw skeletons. Seeing the familiar world again, Xiao Xian could not help but feel happy. It would be horrifying if he saw skeletons all the time. Fortunately, he could see such a colorful world full of vitality. After solving this big problem, Xiao Xian felt very relaxed. This time he saw many familiar faces, including those in the cave, Moer, Sai, and some kids he had met several times. It was better to look at their expressions. The vision full of skeletons was too dark and dull. This time, Xiao Xian finally felt Mao's gaze. But even though he saw it, Xiao Xian just glanced at him and ignored him. Mao was also angry to be ignored by Xiao Xian. He wanted to communicate with Xiao Xian, but at this time, the shaman came. Mao could only swallow his anger. He did not dare to be presumptuous in front of the shaman. The shaman asked about everyone's feelings. After confirming that there was no abnormality, he said that they could leave. As for other things, they could only adapt to it in the future during the hunting missions. As the saying goes, a teacher can show you the way, but it's up to you to practice. Even if the starting point is the same, no one can say for sure how much people who awaken in the same batch will grow in the future. Whether or not they can become an excellent totem warrior is not just a matter of words. Xiao Xian admired the old faker very much. Even though the children living in the orphan cave had experienced hunger and hardship for a long time, most of them were ferocious, but they never complained, nor were they twisted by darkness. When they were awakened, they would still be good warriors running toward the bright road. Most of this was due to the shaman. If the chief was in charge of the material life of the tribe, then the shaman was in charge of the spiritual life of the tribe. The responsibility of a shaman was heavy. Not far from the stone house, there were some people waiting there. They were probably here to visit the child. Among them, Xiao Xian saw a familiar figure. It was hard not to see him. That big pig head was too conspicuous. Wasn't that the arrogant little kid with the exaggerated wild pig head he saw when he went up the mountain yesterday? Mao also saw him. The anger on his face suddenly disappeared, and he walked over with a complacent smile. "Brother, have you become a totem warrior?" The kid with the wild pig head asked. "Of course, who am I?" Mao looked even more complacent. So they were brothers. No wonder Xiao Xian felt that Mao looked familiar. The group of little warriors left one by one. Xiao Xian was about to leave too, but he was stopped by the shaman. "Xian, wait a minute." The shaman walked over and handed a pattern plate to Xiao Xian. "You have raised Caesar well. If you have any difficulties in the future, you can come to me." In the morning, the shaman had asked about Caesar's situation, and roughly knew what had happened to Xiao Xian in the past year. The fish incident did not attract much attention in the mountain, and the shaman had been busy developing herbs. Naturally, he paid little attention to it. He only knew about it this morning. However, the shaman was more interested in Caesar than the fish. He knew that he had neglected him. It was rare for this kid to raise a wolf, so he wanted to compensate him. The pattern plate given by the shaman last time was worn on Caesar's neck. This time, he gave one to Xiao Xian. The shaman also promised to send some food to Xiao Xian after his house was built. Xiao Xian did not refuse. He thanked the shaman and left. After Xiao Xian left, Chief Ao came over, showed the shaman his burned hand, and told him what happened last night. The shaman pondered for a while, and suddenly thought of something. He called Ao into the house. There was no third person beside them. "Now that you mention it, I remember. It is said that the original flame of the fire seed would indeed have such a situation." The shaman said slowly. "Do you mean?" Ao was shocked. As the leader, Ao naturally understood what the so-called original fire seed meant. Except for the first batch of people who settled here, only the chiefs and the shaman in the tribe knew that the flame of the tribe was incomplete. The so-called flame seed did not hurt others. After the floating flame seed fused into the body, it actually did not hurt the user. It was different for other people. After all, everyone had the same source of power in their body, but the power was more or less different. When it was awakened, it would naturally protect the user and repel the non-user. The flame of the fire seed did not hurt dead things, but it was different for living things. If people who did not belong to the tribe touched it, they would naturally be burned. Ao was a member of the tribe, so fundamentally speaking, the flame of the fire seed that awakened the source of power was the same. They were all from the tribe, so the repel was not serious. Ao's body was strong, so it was already good that he was not burned. As for the night swallow flying outside, they did not dare to enter the area where the tribe lived that night, because they would be burned or even burned to death if they touched the flame of the third flame. This was the main reason why Gu suggested Xiao Xian to leave Caesar in the cave instead of taking him up the mountain. However, this kind of self-protection was not so obvious after the flame of the fire seed was incomplete. Then, when the flame of the fire seed is complete, does it mean that the awakening is like Xian's? Ao was surprised. Very likely. Keep this a secret for now and don't let a third person know about it. We will discuss it after I read the animal skin scroll passed down. The shaman said seriously. Ao nodded. He also knew that it would take a long time to figure it out, but as long as he knew it was not a bad thing, it would be fine. As for other people in the tribe, if they asked, he would just say it was the reason for the awakening. Xiao Xian, who was walking down the mountain, did not know that his awakening was related to the flame of the fire seed. It was the way of awakening when the flame of the fire seed was complete. Since the chief and the shaman did not ask about the details of what happened last night, Xiao Xian would not tell them the secret. Instead, he continued to play the role of a child who had just awakened. Stretching his muscles and bones, he could hear the sound of bones cracking, but it was not the stiff feeling that came from sitting still for a long time. Instead, he felt that his whole body was full of energy. The depression that had been accumulating in his heart because he had inexplicably come to this strange world also dissipated a lot. When he walked, he felt that his whole body was much lighter. Standing on the mountain and looking into the distance, Xiao Xian could not help but feel a sense of heroism in his heart. Since he could not go back, he would live well here. He swung his arms and quickened his steps. With a light leap, he was already a few steps away. While running, he felt completely different from yesterday. It was said that after awakening, one could walk like a bird and be stronger than a beast. This was not just a boast. Even if Xiao Xian could not do it now, it was not impossible in the future. Chapter 28. Before Xiao Xian went down the mountain, people in the Mountain Foot district had been talking about Xiao Xian's awakening of totemic power. No one had expected that such a young and weak kid from the orphan cave could awaken his totemic power yesterday. Awakening at such a young age meant that he had great potential. Maybe he could become a powerful totemic warrior in the future. Some people tried to figure out why Xiao Xian awakened so early. Some said that it was because Xiao Xian went out to practice every morning, just like the other kids in the mountain. That was why he could awaken so early. Some people also speculated that it was because of the fish. Such a thing had never happened in the Mountain Foot district before. How could Xiao Xian suddenly appear now? But this theory was refuted as soon as it came out. If it was because of the fish, then there were many kids who ate fish. Their own kids ate a lot of fish, and they were 1 year older than Xiao Xian. But they still hadn't awakened their totemic power. So, in the end, people attributed the early awakening to Xiao Xian's practice every morning, and more people were convinced. So, when Xiao Xian went down the mountain, he found that many kids who used to sleep all day were taken out by adults to help carry stones or fish. Xiao Xian knew the reason after asking some people. Well, working was also a kind of exercise. Xiao Xian didn't refute what they said about waking up early to exercise. As for the real reason, Xiao Xian wouldn't tell them. The kids in the orphan cave didn't go out to fish today. Xiao Xian wasn't here, and Caesar didn't go out to dig for stone worms. Even if they had the tools, they couldn't get the bait, so they couldn't catch the fish. There were too many people in the gravel area, so the kids couldn't get any benefits from digging for stone worms. They were always pushed out. Caesar, on the other hand, didn't care what the other kids in the orphan cave said. Some people even gave him half a fish, but he just squatted at the entrance of the cave and didn't look at anyone. He just stared at the mountain. Seeing Xiao Xian return, Caesar immediately became spirited and rushed towards Xiao Xian. If he hadn't awakened his totem power and become much stronger, Xiao Xian might have been pushed down by her. All the kids in the orphan cave were looking at them eagerly. Xiao Xian took Caesar to the gravel field and dug up a lot of stone worms. After a winter of hibernation, the stone worms had also come out of the ground to move around. Today's harvest was quite good. Now that he had awakened his totem power, Xiao Xian would have to go hunting with him in the future, so he could no longer care about the things in the cave. After discussing with Gu, Xiao Xian assigned Tu and Stutterer to manage the team. Tu was good at counting and had a good memory. Now, he was much bolder and could speak fluently. However, he looked too thin and weak. Stutterer, on the other hand, was not good at other things. His body size was obvious. If he was really fierce, the other kids in the orphanage could not do anything to him. The two of them should be a good team to manage the team. After solving the problem in the orphan cave, Xiao Xian saw Lang Jie coming to him with a bright smile. Good boy. Not bad. You awakened your totem power so early. I thought I would have to wait for another 2 years. Lang Jie was very happy. Xiao Xian had asked them if he could join their hunting team if he awakened his totem power. Mai did not refuse at that time. Later on, he even helped Xiao Xian, which meant that Mai also thought highly of Xiao Xian. When they went to attend the ceremony yesterday, they felt it was a pity that Xiao Xian was not old enough this year. Unexpectedly, Xiao Xian gave them a big surprise last night. As a totem warrior, he would be able to have his own room. And Lang Jie came here to help Xiao Xian. Lang Jie had a barbecue with some of his friends in the hunting team today, and they were talking about the first hunting trip of the year. When he heard that Xiao Xian and the others had already gone down the mountain, he came to find Xiao Xian and invited him to meet his future teammates. There were 6 people in Lang Ga's cabin. They were all very young. One of them had awakened his totem power last year, but he was already 13 years old when he awakened his totem power. After the awakening, he grew much taller, so he looked much older than Xiao Xian. Knowing that these people would be his future teammates, Xiao Xian also greeted them warmly. "Don't worry about the house. We will cut some wood and build it for you tomorrow morning," the young man named Dong said to Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian used to think that he would have to wait for 2 or 3 years before he could have his own room. He didn't expect it to happen so soon. Generally speaking, people like Sai still lived with their own families. But for people like Xiao Xian who came from the orphan cave, they had to build their own houses. Basically, they had to find someone to help them build their own rooms. Since they were here, Lang Jie didn't let Xiao Xian leave right away. They stayed to eat the barbecue together. After a whole winter, the cured barbecue was not fresh anymore. Lang Jie and the others still preferred to eat fresh meat. Anyway, the first hunting trip of the year was coming soon. They brought some leftover cured meat with them and had a good meal. They wanted to get some fresh meat as soon as they finished eating. While they were eating and chatting, Ong suddenly mentioned a word that was widely spread in the tribe, the Feast of the Rich. It was a legend. It was said that someone in the tribe once held such a feast and invited some people in the tribe to attend. The people who held the feast would compete with each other to see who could provide the most food. The so-called more food meant that the guests would stagger and fall into the grass, or eat until they were full and vomited. Only then would the feast be considered a success. This kind of activity was called the Feast of the Rich. According to Lang Jie and the others, Xiao Xian knew that the Feast of the Rich was to give away or destroy more food and property than their competitors. Some of the more prestigious people would even destroy their own food, clothes, and other things in front of others. Sometimes, they would even burn down their own houses in order to establish their prestige in the tribe, humiliate their opponents, and gain the long-term admiration of their followers. Those who could do this were all people who had a certain level of strength and status. They were ambitious people who fought for a higher prestige. They were arrogant, conceited, and stupid enough. When Lang Jie and the others talked about the Feast of the Rich, they didn't hide their admiration, as if they would kneel down immediately if they stood here. Seeing Xiao Xian's shocked expression, Lang Jie said with the attitude of an elder, "You still don't understand." Xiao Xian didn't understand. In his opinion, how stupid would they be to do such a thing? How could they be worshipped by Lang Jie and the other warriors? No, it should be said that the people in the tribe worshipped this very much. Thinking back to his previous life, Xiao Xian had to have leftovers to give face when treating people to a meal. Xiao Xian suddenly understood. It turned out that this custom was passed down from a long time ago. But even if it was wasteful, it shouldn't be to this extent. He still underestimated the people's obsession with food and their pursuit of this alternative view of food. In the past, he always heard the children in the tribe talk about which warrior had defeated which huge and ferocious beast. Those heroes of the past were worshipped, and these glorious deeds were remembered and passed down from generation to generation for the children to hear. But now, Xiao Xian was told that there was another kind of glorious deed that was even more glorious. It turned out that in order to make people follow you willingly, you didn't need to use force to beat them down again and again. You didn't need to persuade them, give them benefits, or make a lot of psychological schemes. All you needed to do was hold a feast of the rich, and there would naturally be countless willing followers. Xiao Xian felt that his values and outlook on life had been distorted again. Looking up at the 2 crescent moons in the night sky, Xiao Xian sighed, "One day I'll definitely be stupid." "What did you just say?" Lang Jie didn't quite understand the second half of Xiao Xian's sentence. "Nothing. I mean, if possible, let's hold one too," Xiao Xian said. Lang Jie and the others laughed when they heard this. Lang Jie patted Xiao Xian's shoulder and laughed non-stop. After laughing, he praised Xiao Xian, "You're ambitious." In the eyes of Lang Jie and the others, Xiao Xian's words were just childish words that came out of his mouth after hearing about the legends. They didn't take it to heart. After all, they had never seen anyone hold a feast of the rich, not even their parents or ancestors. Were the legends true? Even the shaman and chief hadn't seen one. Probably because he felt that it wasn't good to continue this topic, Lang Jie changed the topic. He wanted to show off more to Xiao Xian. Do you know what our closest companions are since we were born? Lang Jie asked. Xiao Xian sat up straight and lowered his head to think for a moment. He looked meaningfully at Lang Jie and asked tentatively, left hand? Lang Jie, next week's ranking, please support me with your recommendation votes. Chapter 29. Lang Jie choked. Originally, Lang Jie had thought of several possible answers that Xiao Xian might give. Then, as an elder and an experienced person, he would answer and teach him one by one, just like when new members joined. However, Lang Jie did not expect that Xiao Xian would not follow the rules at all. He really did not understand why Xiao Xian would give such an answer. What did it matter? However, Lang Jie did not think too much about it. With a stern face, he corrected, it's the stone. You should also know that a long time ago, when our tribe first settled here, we lived in the stone cave. Every day, we would see and touch stones. They could shelter us from the wind and rain, cut wood, and chop firewood for us. As he spoke, Lang Ga's stern face became lighter. His emotions were slightly excited. He clenched his fist and said, at the same time, we also use stones. With them, we can pierce through the thick skin of fierce beasts. We use stones to smash the heads of those prey. Even if we are in danger, the stones will still be with us until the last moment. They could provide protection, accompany, and never betray or abandon. People in the tribe began to touch stones from the moment they were born. They played with stones, used stones daily, and used stones as tools. For warriors who often went out to hunt, stones were more than familiar. They could not live without stones. No wonder Lang Jie said so. Of course, Xiao Xian preferred to call stones tools. After all, stones had no life. Now, do you know who our closest partner is? Lang Jie looked at Xiao Xian. His eyes seemed to say, little guy, try saying something wrong again. Xiao Xian nodded seriously and seriously. Stone. Ha, that's right. Lang Jie suddenly showed a satisfied smile and continued to talk about hunting. By the way, Xian, you have just awakened. You can't participate in the first hunt this year. Maybe you can't participate in the second one either. As for the third one, it depends on your ability. Lang Jie said. Ha! There was such a saying. Xiao Xian really didn't understand. Seeing Xiao Xian's confusion, Lang Jie explained, you've just awakened, so you're not familiar with using your abilities yet. You'll have to go through a period of training. Lang Jie was tactful, but Xiao Xian could guess the reason from these words. The reason why the newly awakened children were not allowed to participate was to protect them. After the end of winter, when the flowers bloomed in the warm spring, many wild beasts that had been hungry for the whole winter would become active again in the forest. The poisonous snakes were also more venomous. The forest was full of all kinds of dangers. If no one followed and protected them at all times, it was very easy to die in the forest. The tribesmen didn't want to see such a thing happen. The second reason was that Xiao Xian's group was not up to standard yet. In a hunting team that valued teamwork, they would only be a burden. Not only would they not be able to help, but they would also drag the team down. Understood. Xiao Xian was not disappointed after he thought it through. Besides, he also felt that they should build a good foundation first. More practice was not a bad thing. He thought that Xiao Xian would be disappointed or unwilling like the other children, but he didn't expect that Xiao Xian would be able to think it through. Lang Jie was relieved. He pulled Xiao Xian over so that Xiao Xian could get to know a few people in the hunting team, and also to talk to Xiao Xian about this. In the past, many children sharpened their knives and wanted to go hunting with them, but they were told that they couldn't go the first 2 times. Many of them made a lot of noise. Usually, in that kind of situation, the children would be disciplined by their elders. After a few punches and slaps, they would become much more obedient. But Xiao Xian came from the orphan cave, and had no parents now. He was still young, and looked thinner than other children. Lang Jie was really afraid that he would be hurt. "Okay, I'm relieved that you can think it through. Oh right, I have a few good stone cores here. You can see if you can use them. You can polish them yourself, or go find a stonemason." Lang Jie took out several stones of different sizes from a big animal skin bag, which were the stone cores that Lang Jie mentioned. Stone cores were the raw materials for making stone tools. After giving the stone cores to Xiao Xian, Lang Jie also told Xiao Xian some of his training experiences. The others didn't hide anything from him, because they didn't have such an awareness. Xiao Xian kept their suggestions in mind, and sincerely thanked them. "Your father helped me when he was alive," Lang Jie said. People in the hunting group were all like that. They would help each other whenever they could. Although they couldn't help much, at least they could make Xiao Xian's life easier. After eating the barbecue, Xiao Xian left. He still had things to do, and Lang Jie and the others would continue to discuss the upcoming hunting in 5 days. Xiao Xian came out of Lang Ga's room. He didn't walk far before he was stopped by someone. "Are you Xian?" Xiao Xian looked towards the direction of the voice. It was a kid who was a little older than Xiao Xian. He looked about the same age as Sai, but he was a little stronger. The animal skin he was wearing was of good quality. He didn't look like he lived in the Mountain Foot district. He should live on the mountainside or even higher. Xiao Xian had some impression of him. He awakened in the same batch, but Xiao Xian didn't know his name. At this moment, the kid lifted his chin slightly, looking arrogant. He was sizing up Xiao Xian. Didn't his eyes get tired of lifting his chin while standing at a high place? Xiao Xian looked at him and asked, "Who are you?" At first, Xiao Xian thought that Fei would put on airs and say something like, "It doesn't matter who I am," but Xiao Xian heard him say directly, "My name is Fei. 5 days later, I will go out with the hunting team to participate in the first hunt of the year. You have to wait for a long time, don't you?" After saying that, he proudly laughed at Xiao Xian, and then jumped over Xiao Xian's head. When he landed on the ground, he jumped again. After a few leaps, he was standing in front of Lang Ga's door. Obviously, he wanted to talk to Lang Ga. Before entering the house, the kid turned around and snorted at Xiao Xian, showing off and complacent. That move just now was not bad among his peers. His father often praised him for running faster, jumping higher, and jumping further than others. Xiao Xian scratched his chin. That kid made such a big noise when he landed. Was it really okay for him to go hunting with them? However, for a kid like Fei, who had just awakened, to be able to go hunting with the hunting group for the first time, it was obvious that someone in the group was protecting him, and that person must have a high position in the group. Otherwise, people like Lang Jie and the others would have no right to speak. Being protected by someone was indeed willful. However, Xiao Xian was not discouraged. He was not depressed because of what happened just now. He was not a real kid, and he knew how to make progress step by step. He was not so eager for quick success. This kind of thing might affect other kids, but he didn't care at all. Xiao Xian took Caesar to catch some fish. After a whole winter, the fish in the river were still so stupid, biting the bait and not letting go. They looked fierce, but unfortunately, they did not have much intelligence. When he was at Lang Ga's place, he heard them talking about hunting. Xiao Xian knew that many prey in the forest were like piranhas in the river. They looked fierce and had long teeth all day long, but as long as you knew the trick, it was easy to catch them. Some prey looked docile, had no fangs, and were vegetarian, but if you were not careful, you would be sent to heaven. Their aggressiveness was not inferior to many carnivorous species. After all, this was an unfamiliar world, so it was better to be prepared. Xiao Xian thought. Carrying the fish and a few pieces of old animal skin, Xiao Xian asked someone to help sew the animal skin bag and paid the crafting fee for 1 fish. Then he took the remaining 3 fish to the stoneware maker Ko. Now that he was strong, he did not need Caesar's help. Xiao Xian was not tired carrying 4 big fish by himself. When Xiao Xian arrived, a few people came out of Ke's house, holding various finished stoneware in their hands, such as stone knives, spearheads, adzes, and so on. These people were all here to exchange for stoneware. After all, the hunting was about to begin, so they also needed to prepare more tools. Ke was a famous stoneware maker in the mountain foot area, so naturally, there were many people here. However, if it were not for Ke's bad temper, there would be more people coming to exchange for stoneware. Every year, Ke would drive away some people who came to exchange for stoneware. Some people said that Ke was just too direct. When he spoke, he was merciless and did not know how to beat around the bush. However, Xiao Xian did not think so. Did Ke really not know many things? Was he really that straightforward? Not necessarily. After getting permission, Xiao Xian lifted the curtain and walked in. Ke was making stoneware. During the winter, he made some stoneware, but these 2 days, he exchanged most of them. There were still some stone cores and food piled up in the house. These were the processing fee that he had not collected yet. Putting the fish on the side of the pile of food, Xiao Xian came to Ke. "Uncle Ke, I want to learn how to make stoneware." Last time when Xiao Xian came to learn, Ke said that it was not the right time yet, and that he should wait until he awakened his totem power. Now, Xiao Xian had awakened his totem power, and according to Langa's training method, he needed a lot of stoneware tools. Xiao Xian did not have enough food to exchange for training stoneware, so he wanted to make stoneware himself. Ke stopped what he was doing, and looked at Xiao Xian carefully from head to toe, and then looked directly into Xiao Xian's eyes. Xiao Xian did not avoid it. A few seconds later, Ke handed Xiao Xian a stone hammer, and pointed at a stone core not far away. There were a few lines drawn on the stone core, but they were all curved instead of straight lines. "Follow the lines and hit," Ke said. As a newcomer, Xiao Xian took the stone hammer, looked at Ke, and then looked at the stone core. He lifted the hammer and hit it. The first hit was too cautious. He hit the line, but only made a small dent on the stone core. He did not use enough strength. Again. The second hit was too forceful. What he hit was not a stone chip, but a stone, and it went beyond the line. Xiao Xian caught a glimpse of Ke's forehead, and knew that Ke was very dissatisfied with his 2 hits. But since Ke did not say anything, Xiao Xian continued to hit the stone along the line, and he did it boldly. He was not afraid of the first 2 hits. Peeling a stone chip of a predetermined size from the stone core was not as simple as it seemed. The stoneware maker had to estimate the length of contact between the hammer and the stone core, the angle of impact, the speed, and so on according to different stone materials. Was it a straight hit? Or a curved hit? What was the material of the stone hammer and stone core? How much strength should be used, and so on and so on. Ke had told Xiao Xian all these, and Xiao Xian had seen Ke peel the stone chips from the stone core every time he came here. But when he really started to do it, he knew that it was very difficult. A small difference could lead to a huge difference. Again. Xiao Xian hammered again and again, while Ke sat beside and watched silently. Caesar, who was squatting beside, looked at Xiao Xian, and then looked at Ke, who was silent but had a strange look on his face. He moved his legs, moved back, and moved again, and directly retreated to the corner to lie down with the fish. "Sorry, that's it." Chapter 30. At first, Xiao Xian would look at Ke's reaction every time he hammered. But after a while, he stopped paying attention to Ke and immersed himself in hammering. The process of hammering required a lot of mental and physical effort. It was not as simple as waving one's arms. Every hammering required a lot of consideration, such as the angle, strength, how to swing the hammer, where to hit, and so on. All of these had to be decided in a short moment. For many people in the tribe, after hammering for a long time and gaining experience, they could achieve the best hammering effect based solely on their intuition. However, Xiao Xian was just a beginner. It was impossible for him to have the experience of a stoneware master who had been hammering for decades. He could only rely on calculation and rough estimation, and then try again and again to improve. Even though his body was much stronger now, and his strength had increased, it was not infinite. When he first held the stone hammer, it did not feel heavy. But after hammering for a long time, as the strength in his body drained away, he felt that the stone hammer in his hand was getting heavier and heavier. However, he could not make any mistakes at this time. If he changed the strength of his hammering, the leaf-shaped stone pieces that were hammered down would completely exceed his expectations, and there would be a lot of waste materials. Because of this, Xiao Xian did not have the energy to pay attention to Ku's reaction. At first, the time between hammering was slightly longer, because Xiao Xian had to think about the shortcomings of the previous hammering, so that he could improve on the next hammering. However, as he hammered again and again, Xiao Xian gradually got the hang of it. He became more proficient, and the time between hammering became shorter and shorter. After countless hammering, Xiao Xian felt that he was about to collapse. However, Ku did not ask him to stop. Instead, he would point out his mistakes from time to time. It was like running a marathon. As he ran, he felt that he was about to reach his limit. He wanted to stop and rest, but every time he stopped, someone would urge him from behind. Go on. Go on. Knowing Ku's temper, Xiao Xian knew that if he stopped now, he would not be able to learn stoneware from Ku in the future. Even if he was tired, he could only grit his teeth and continue hammering. When the last bit of strength in his body seemed to have been drained, Xiao Xian gradually felt relaxed as he hammered. For a moment, he even wondered if this was the feeling of breaking through one's limit. What Xiao Xian did not know was that when he felt relaxed and much of his strength recovered, totem patterns had already appeared on his face. Unknowingly, he had already activated his totemic power. However, he was too focused on hammering and did not pay attention to the totem that lit up in his mind. Ku's attention to attention, he was a lot of people's attention to stone crafting skills, but very few people would use their totem to use their totem power in the process. Some people thought that totemic power was sacred and could only be used for hunting and defending the tribe. Although some people didn't think so, it wasn't easy to control totemic power precisely. Only experienced old warriors could do that. However, people at Xiao Xian's age, or some young warriors like Lang Jie, could not control it well. Once they used their totem power, it was easy to break the stone core into pieces. That was not processing, but destruction. Those who were impatient or irritable would just quit. It was too fucking tiring. If they had the time, they might as well practice their hunting skills. Because of this, Ku was very surprised. Not only did Xiao Xian use his totem power, but he also did not directly break the stone core. Instead, the leaf-like stone pieces were even more perfect. Almost every piece of stone could be further processed, and would not become waste. How rare! However, Xiao Xian did not notice it at all. He was immersed in hammering, and his mind was filled with the experience of each hammering. Then, he would proceed to the next hammering. Therefore, he missed the surprised expression on Ku's face for a few minutes. It was not easy to make Ku, who usually kept a straight face and rarely showed any other expressions, show such a surprised expression even when talking to familiar people. Xiao Xian didn't stop until he finished hammering out the lines. He looked at the ground next to the stone core. Some of the small pieces of stone pieces were gathered into a small pile, and some were scattered on the ground. He looked at Ku, who was still expressionless. Xiao Xian put down the stone hammer, and breathed heavily, waiting for Ku's evaluation. At the same time, he sighed in his heart. It was not easy to be a stoneware craftsman. No wonder there were so many injured warriors in the tribe who could no longer participate in hunting, but only a small part of them became stoneware craftsmen. The rest of the stoneware craftsmen only did it for their own daily life, and to provide stoneware tools for the younger generation. Apart from that, they also had other things to do. For example, Gu was responsible for the logistics of transportation, instead of stoneware craftsmen. Naturally, their skills in stoneware crafting were not as good as professional stoneware craftsmen like Ku. The surprised expression on Ku's face had already calmed down, and he returned to his usual expressionless face. He was still sitting in the same place. He raised his hand and took a slender wooden stick from the side, and pushed aside the stone pieces that were piled up together. Then, with a slight shake of his hand, the slender wooden stick picked up a small piece of stone with a sharp tip. The small piece of stone that was picked up drew a parabola in the air, and fell into a wooden box full of stone pieces to be processed. The stone pieces that were peeled off could be made into scrapers, sharp tools, stone awls, stone arrowheads, and so on. Although there seemed to be a lot of stone pieces knocked off, Ku's picking speed was also very fast. Xiao Xian saw the stone pieces flying from the ground into the stone plate like a string of beads, and was overwhelmed. Before Xiao Xian could take a few breaths, Ku had finished picking. Putting down the wooden stick, Ku said expressionlessly, "Trash." Xiao Xian's eyelids twitched, but he soon realized that the trash was not talking about him, but the stone pieces that were knocked off from the ground and could not be processed further. These were considered as trash. Obviously, Ku was not satisfied with the amount of stone pieces that were knocked off. "I originally planned to make a stone ball, but now it seems that I can barely make an adze." Ku looked at the stone core that had been peeled off with disdain, and said a long sentence, which was rare for him. Xiao Xian suddenly felt relieved. He was worried that Ku would directly ask him to leave, but since Ku said so, it meant that he did not object to teaching him. "Give it to me." Ku pointed at the stone core that Xiao Xian had knocked off. Xiao Xian quickly put down the stone hammer, took the stone core that was in a terrible state, and put it on the stone anvil in front of Ku. "Look carefully." Ku picked up the stone hammer that Xiao Xian had just used, and with the other hand, he picked up the stone core that was twice as wide as his palm. He held it firmly and looked at the stone core. Xiao Xian only heard a whoosh sound of wind, and the hammer flashed by. Ding! The stone hammer hit the stone core, making a crisp sound. At the same time, a stone piece was knocked off from the stone core and peeled off. The stone piece that was knocked off did not directly fall to the ground, but fell into a wooden box hanging on the wall. From swinging the hammer to knocking, Ku was very neat, as if he had already determined which piece of the stone core would be knocked off before he swung the hammer. He was not like Xiao Xian when he was knocking just now, as if he was on a battlefield, but when he swung the hammer, there was a kind of casualness. This was the real, peeling stone, unlike Xiao Xian who was just knocking off the stone, and what he knocked off was mostly waste. After the first strike, Ku did not give Xiao Xian too much time to think, and then the second strike, the third strike, and the fourth strike. The hammer flashed continuously, and the sound of ding-ding was incessant. As the hammer moved faster and faster, Xiao Xian even felt that the sound had become one, and he almost could not hear the interval between the hammer strikes. The stone pieces that were peeled off from the stone core fell into the wooden box one by one, and at first glance, it looked like a rainbow bridge, connecting the stone core and the wooden box. Xiao Xian's eyes were straight. He knew that Ku's ability to restrain stoneware was very strong, but he still did not expect that he had underestimated this old stoneware craftsman. He actually had such uncanny workmanship. This was not peeling stone, this was simply cutting noodles with a knife. Obviously, when Xiao Xian came to observe in the past, he did not see Ku's real ability. What he saw in the past was just the tip of the iceberg, and it was far from being enough to describe Ku's stoneware skills. So exquisite. So precise. When Xiao Xian came back to his senses, Ku had already finished peeling the stone pieces, and the stone core in his hand was already in the shape of an adze. After that, he drilled and polished, installed the wooden handle, and shaped the tool. Perfect. Take it. Ku handed the completed adze to Xiao Xian. For me. Xiao Xian took the adze and looked at Ku. Ku had already turned around to do other things, so he took the adze and waved it twice. He had participated in the processing of this adze. Although his skills were rough and unsightly, and he had almost destroyed the stone core, it was still his first time seriously participating in the process. It was also rare for him to see Ku's ultimate skills. For Xiao Xian, it naturally meant a lot. The stone core used to make this adze was fine, compact, and hard. It did not look obvious, but when he held it in his hand, he could clearly feel its weight. It was of a medium quality. He did not expect Ko to give it to him just like that. Peeling stone pieces, even if it's the simplest way, takes a lot of time to achieve the most satisfactory result, and there is no shortcut. You have to anticipate the peeling of each piece of stone, and then think about the speed, weight, strength, consequences, and so on, and relate them to the stone core. The amount of strength, the best angle, and the thousands of changes in the process from raw material to finished product are all things that cannot be described in words. How to use strength, what angle, how to hit. You can only understand these through repeated practice. Ko turned his back to Xiao Xian and said, "Yes." Stone tools were different from iron tools. One wrong step could not be repaired, and there was no way to reverse it. Once the hammer hit, it was either a success or a failure. The hammer was the final word. Xiao Xian held the adze and bowed respectfully to Ko. "Yes, I understand." But, Ko changed the topic and pointed at the dead fish in the corner who were staring at Caesar. "You have to know how to summarize when you practice. If you fail, you can, but you have to learn from your mistakes. You can't be like these fish." "Understood." Xiao Xian could understand what Ko meant. Ko meant that Xiao Xian should not be like these piranhas, who were stubborn and did not learn from their mistakes. They would not turn back even if they were killed. "Take one of them away," Ko said. He was driving him away. "Oh." Since Ko asked Xiao Xian to take a fish back, it was useless for Xiao Xian to refuse. Without saying anything more, he took a fish, the adze, and called Caesar to leave. Carrying the fish out of the door, Xiao Xian looked at the fish in his hand and thought of Ko's words. He could not help but laugh and poked the fish's head with the adze. "Stupid fish, are you blaming me? There was one more thing tonight." Chapter 31. Early the next morning, Lang Jie and the others came to the cave to look for Xiao Xian. The wood was ready, and they were just waiting for Xiao Xian to name the place. They would start building the house on whichever piece of land he liked. Xiao Xian was familiar with the Mountain Foot district. With his current condition, it was impossible for him to build a house on the mountainside. Wouldn't that be asking for trouble? As for the place to build the house, Xiao Xian already had his eyes on it. Although it was a little out of the way, he could see the situation on the mountain, the foot of the mountain, and the cave from there. Lang Jie and the others were very familiar with building a wooden house, and with their great strength, it took them only half a day to build the wooden house. They just needed to fix some small details, and the wooden house could be lived in directly. This was the first time they built a house, and the area of the wooden house was only about 40 square meters. It looked okay, and they could expand it by themselves in the future. At least they would have their own place in the future. Overall, Xiao Xian was very satisfied. Lang Jie and the others wanted to chop the extra wood for firewood, but Xiao Xian stopped them. He asked Lang Jie to help him build a simple wooden bed. Some people in the tribe liked to sleep on stone beds, some liked to sleep on haystacks, and some people built their beds with wood. Xiao Xian naturally preferred the latter. It looked much more comfortable than sleeping in the cave. "Xian." Xiao Xian heard the voice and looked over. It was a middle-aged woman named Yi. She did not awaken her totemic power, and also lived in the Mountain Foot district. She took some sewing jobs, and was a good person. Xiao Xian often asked her to help him sew animal skin bags. Yesterday, he took the fish and asked Yi to help him sew it. He also told her in detail how it looked like. He thought it would take 2 or 3 days, but it was done so quickly. "And Yi, is it done?" Xiao Xian asked with a smile. "Yes, it's not a problem." Yi handed the things over to Xiao Xian. Because he still had work to do, he did not stay for long. He left after giving the things to Xiao Xian. "What's this animal skin bag for?" Lang Jie, who was chopping wood, asked. "Of course, it's for training." Xiao Xian didn't say much. He took the animal skin bag into the room and put it away. He hadn't tried it yet, so he didn't know if it would work. Lang Jie and the others didn't have much curiosity, so they continued with the final touches of the house. When they were almost done, Xiao Xian invited Lang Jie and the others to stay for lunch. In addition to fish, there were also some plant tubers and fruits. These plants were brought over by Lang Jie and the others. Among them, there were 2 young warriors who lived on the mountainside. They were interested in fish, but they didn't have much time to fish. When it was not their turn to hunt, they would prepare stone tools and train for the next hunt. Moreover, they didn't lack food, so they didn't join the fishing team. You can all take one back later. I have a lot of fish here. Xiao Xian didn't lie. Yesterday afternoon, after he returned to the cave, he went to the river to fish with the kids in the cave. Usually, as long as he was free and there were no abnormalities in the river, fishing was a simple thing. Those fish were too stupid. Besides, when Xiao Xian joined the hunting team in the future, these kids would have to take care of him. Compared to that, a few fish were a small matter. The young warriors were a little embarrassed, but when they saw that Xiao Xian really didn't care about it, they accepted it. They planned to chop some wood later to strengthen Xiao Xian's wooden house. While they were eating, Gu came over with a big stone vat. Old Ku asked me to bring it to you. It's to celebrate you having your own house. You can use it to store food or water. Gu put down the stone vat and looked at the wooden house that was almost finished. He said, "Not bad. I wanted to help, but it seems that I'm not needed anymore." Xiao Xian curled his lips. "If you really wanted to help, why did you come so late?" Lang Jie and the others knew that Gu was talking nonsense, but they didn't say anything out of respect for the old warrior. "Hey, is this stone vat for Xian?" Lang Jie asked a stupid question to change the topic. "Yes, old Ku specially made it for Xian." Gu emphasized old Ku and specially when he said that and looked at Xiao Xian. According to Ji's understanding of old Ku, the old man was naturally very satisfied with Xiao Xian. In the past, old Ku also wanted to teach someone, but unfortunately, all of them were disappointing. They were either impatient or indecisive. When they encountered a medium high-quality stone core, they didn't dare to touch it. At that time, old Ku directly drove them away and didn't pay any attention to them. Many people thought that old Ku was unreasonable, but in fact, old Ku was just too disappointed. But now that he finally had his eyes on someone, old Ku still had a long face. If he angered Xiao Xian this time, who would be better than Xiao Xian in the future? Gu looked at him anxiously. In fact, on the night of Xiao Xian's awakening, after the sacrificial ceremony, Ku came back and asked Gu to exchange for a suitable big stone. After working for 2 consecutive nights, he finally made the stone vat. This stone vat was about the same size as the one Gu used to send food to the cave every day, but the workmanship was much better. The stone vat was almost the same thickness, and the inside was polished very smooth. The outside was not only polished very carefully, but also carved with some patterns, such as mountains, rivers, birds and beasts. Xiao Xian had not seen many birds and beasts before, but Ku must have seen them when he went out hunting. People like Ku usually only thought about the practical aspects when making stone tools, and rarely did they make any fancy designs. Now that he made a water vat for Xiao Xian like this, it was obvious that Ku valued Xiao Xian very much. "This stone vat is so beautiful." Lang Jie and the others surrounded the stone vat and said enviously. Although they usually valued practicality more, and didn't care much about a water vat, who wouldn't like more beautiful objects? This stone vat was not only big, but also had special carvings and a matching stone lid. Usually, most people would just cover it with animal skins or straw mats, or just cover it with stone slabs. Very few people would have a cover for the entire water tank. Even the 2 young warriors who lived on the mountainside didn't have such a cover for their water tanks. "Yeah, what a good vat. I've lived for so many years, but I've never seen such a stone vat at home." Gu said. "Is the Ku you're talking about the one who was famous for making traps?" Ong, who came with Lang Jie, asked. Yes, that's him. Lang Jie nodded. I heard that many people wanted to learn from Ku, but later. Ong didn't continue. What happened later? Later on, those who wanted to learn from Ku were either driven away by anger, scolded, or forced to leave. Later on, gradually no one went to him, and Ku moved from the mountain to the mountain foot area. Ku was indeed very famous in the tribe, but now very few people would mention him. Old Ku is very capable. Although he is very strict, you can learn good things from him. Gu said to Xiao Xian earnestly. Yes, Xian, are you learning from Ku now? You must hold on, Ku was really good at that time. Lang Jie also came over. In order to encourage Xiao Xian, he also told him about his experience of learning to set a ground bow from his grandfather. At that time, he was also scolded like shit. At that time, he was not only scolded, but also beaten. Lang Ga's grandfather was also a very good warrior. Lang Jie couldn't escape from the old man's hands. Every time the children living around saw Lang Jie being beaten, they would laugh at him. At that time, Lang Jie felt very embarrassed and blamed his grandfather for a long time. Later, when Lang Jie really became a warrior, he realized his grandfather's good intentions. They hunted in the forest. Although the ground bow couldn't directly kill the beasts, it could still play a key role. Because of his excellent skill in setting a ground bow, Lang Jie was quickly accepted by the hunting team. Every time after a hunt, he would get a lot of food, at least more than others at the same level of strength. If you can learn more skills, your future path will be much easier. Not only will you be able to occupy a more important position in the hunting team, but if you are injured during a hunt and become like me and Old Ku, it will be inconvenient for you to hunt with the hunting team. But if you stay in the tribe, you can at least learn more skills to make a living, and live a better life without starving. Said Gu. Therefore, Lang Jie and Gu both agreed that even if they were scolded like shit, they had to bear with it and learn as many skills as they could. It would be best if they could squeeze all the skills out of their opponents. Not to mention that Gu had a lot of good things hidden away, so they had to squeeze even more. Listening to their words, Xiao Xian nodded solemnly. I know what you mean. If you want to learn skills from others, you can ask for anything, but you can't be shameless. Lang Jie and Gu said, yes. Chapter 32. Xiao Xian naturally wanted to learn Old Ku's craftsmanship. In addition to making stone tools, he also knew how to set traps, which were very useful for hunting. However, it was still too early for Xiao Xian. He had no foundation, so he could only start with the most basic hammering skills, and slowly learn the more advanced ones later. Xiao Xian could feel Old Ku's attitude towards Xiao Xian. Old Ku had been helping him since a long time ago, but sometimes Old Ku's words could be easily misunderstood. For example, yesterday when he went to Old Ku to learn how to make stone tools, he tried to peel off the stone leaves, and was evaluated as useless. People who didn't understand him would definitely misunderstand. Fortunately, Xiao Xian had a flexible mind. He understood what Old Ku meant after thinking for a while. Seeing that Xiao Xian didn't reject their words, Gu immediately felt relieved. When he left, he planned to go to Old Ku's place later to ask for credit. It would be best if he could get something good from Old Ku as a reward. After helping Xiao Xian build the wooden house, Lang Jie and the others left. They had other things to do. After all, the first hunting trip was coming soon. Every time they went hunting, they risked their lives. They had to be well prepared to return safely. There were 2 hunting groups in the tribe. The 2 groups took turns to go hunting. When one went out, the other would be on duty in the tribe. They were responsible for the safety and defense of the tribe. After all, there were too many wild beasts in the mountains, and there were many old, weak, sick and disabled people in the tribe. Each hunting group was divided into 2 groups. According to what Lang Jie said, they were divided into 2 groups according to the warriors' abilities. The first group consisted mostly of totem warriors who lived on the mountainside or above, while the second group consisted mainly of people who lived on the mountainside. Lang Jie and the others were in the second group. When Xiao Xian went hunting, he would naturally follow them. After Lang Jie and the others left, Xiao Xian looked at the newly built wooden house. Caesar was curiously walking around the wooden house. "If you shit in the house, I'll throw you out," Xiao Xian said. When they were in the cave, Xiao Xian had trained Caesar to go to a special place to shit like the children in the cave, or go directly outside the cave. Now that they had moved to a new place, he didn't know if the wolf could adapt quickly. "We will live here in the future. We will make a wooden table, chairs and stools," and, after lying on the bed and resting for a while, Xiao Xian took out the sewn animal skin bag that he had delivered in the morning. He went out to find some gravel and put it in the bag to weigh it. Xiao Xian found the gravel that was heavier. These gravel were thrown away as waste after the stone tools were made. There were still a lot of gravel, and they were piled up like a small hill. Probably because the stone worms didn't like the gravel, they were rarely found there. Therefore, not many people went there. When Lang Jie talked about weight training, Xiao Xian thought about it. Therefore, he asked someone to help him sew a special animal skin bag. After filling it with gravel, it weighed nearly 200 pounds. Xiao Xian once wondered if these stones were metal ores, but after looking at them, he found that these stones were no different from the other stones in the gravel field except that they were harder and heavier. Xiao Xian naturally wanted to use ironware, but he didn't know how to make iron. More importantly, there were a lot of things in this world that were completely different from his previous life. There were too many things that couldn't be judged by common sense. Most of the stones here were unfamiliar to Xiao Xian. Therefore, instead of spending a lot of time to study them, Xiao Xian was more willing to solve the problem at hand. He didn't want to think about making copper or iron now. He tied a few animal skin bags to his arms and legs. After tying them, he moved a little and felt that it was okay. He could still carry another stone. It was obvious that a totemic warrior's body was really strong. Then, the weight training started with his daily movements. Although Xiao Xian couldn't carry 1,000 pounds with one arm like Gu, he could still lift a few hundred pounds. If it was in his previous life, Xiao Xian wouldn't believe that he could have such strength. When Xiao Xian was trying, he saw Caesar baring his teeth outside, so he untied the animal skin bag with gravel. As soon as he untied it, he heard someone calling his name outside. "Is Xian here?" Two very tall and strong warriors came over. They looked very young, about the same age as Lang Ga. Their bodies were full of strong muscles, and their voices were rough and bold. "I'm Tua, and he's Kiki. The shaman asked me to bring you something," Tua said. Tua was much calmer than Lang Ga. Although he looked at Xiao Xian, he didn't mean any harm. There was even a smile on his face. The shaman fulfilled his promise. On the first day that Xiao Xian had his own house, he sent people to bring food to him. It was also a compensation to Xiao Xian. There was a lot of meat, all of which had been processed, and some had been pickled. In addition to the meat, there were several kinds of plant tubers and fresh fruits. In addition to these, there were 2 bags of herbs. Xiao Xian had seen one bag of herbs when he lived in the cave. It was mainly used to treat small illnesses, so he knew how to use it. Tua told Xiao Xian about the other bag, which was mainly used to treat external bleeding. As for the other person, he didn't seem to be a well-behaved person. And just now Tua said, "The shaman asked me to bring you something, instead of we." Obviously, Kiki wasn't sent here by the shaman. After entering the house, Kiki kept staring at Caesar. He had his back to Xiao Xian, so Xiao Xian couldn't see his eyes. But judging from Caesar's expression, he knew it wasn't a friendly look. These warriors, who often went out to hunt, looked at animals as if they were prey. When they saw animals, they couldn't wait to stab them with their spears. Caesar's whole body was tense, and he couldn't help showing his fangs. He was almost ready to fight. "Hey, this wolf can be raised like this," Kiki said. When Xiao Xian was wondering if this warrior despised Caesar for being too cowardly and not as ferocious as the wolves in the forest, Kiki smacked his lips and continued, it can be eaten in half a year. Caesar immediately showed his 4 fangs to the warrior, and his eyes were alert. He made a growling sound from his throat, which was a warning. It seemed that he would pounce on the warrior and bite him in the next moment. Good! The warrior quickly pulled out the stone knife from his waist and said excitedly. Tua, who was explaining the use of herbs to Xiao Xian, heard the warrior's words. His face stiffened, and then twitched violently. He immediately put down his things, and like a whirlwind, rushed to Kiki, who was confronting Caesar with the knife, and punched him. Good my ass! Put your knife away! Kiki was punched and flew out of the window, and fell on the ground outside with a bang. Xiao Xian was speechless. Totem warriors were really simple and violent. After punching Tua, he walked to Xiao Xian and said, "He's always like this. He gets excited when he sees a beast. Don't worry, he's just used to it. He won't do it for real." After all, the wolf was the witch's card, so they didn't dare to do it for real. However, when he just finished his words, Kiki, who had just been punched, walked into the room as if nothing had happened. He moved his feet and walked to Caesar again. This time, he didn't hold the knife, but just rubbed his fingers. It was obvious that he hadn't given up yet. Tua had no other choice. The witch asked him to move things here, but he didn't expect to meet Kiki on the way. When he heard that they were going to the newly awakened warrior, the one who had surprised them the most at the ceremony, Kiki immediately became interested and followed them. Tua had wanted to talk more with this little warrior who was valued by the witch, but now he regretted letting Kiki come with him. If he let Kiki stay here, he might really fight with this wolf. This little wolf couldn't even take one punch from Kiki. What if it was killed? They would be scolded by the witch. Xiao Xian only saw a shadow flash in front of him. The next moment, Tua appeared behind Kiki and dragged him out with his arm around Kiki's neck. At the same time, he turned back and said to Xiao Xian, "We've delivered the things. We'll leave now. We'll talk later when you go hunting with us." After the two left, Caesar also relaxed. He sniffed around, and then dragged out the animal skin bag that Kiki had just carried. It seemed that he was going to throw it out. Xiao Xian hurried to stop him. There were some dried fruits in the bag, many of which he hadn't tasted yet. It would be a waste to throw them away. While packing up, Xiao Xian recalled what Tua had said. Tuo's last sentence meant that they were in the same hunting group as Xiao Xian. But Lang Jie and the others didn't mention these two people when they were talking. The first group. Chapter 33. Early the next morning, Xiao Xian tied the animal skin bag with gravel and ran to the training ground with Caesar. In the past, when he hadn't awakened, he had always been afraid. If he wasn't careful, he would be accidentally injured or even die. Now, he was much more confident. At least he wasn't so weak that he couldn't take a beating. People in the tribe did not know too many tricks. They could only imagine a prey and make a more direct response according to the prey's habits. Some warriors would treat the cliff as some kind of wild beast, and then hit the cliff with their fists and feet. Therefore, if you saw sand and stones flying around on the mountain, don't be surprised. It was just a totemic warrior practicing. Just like that night at the shaman's place, the kid could break an ordinary stone spear with one punch. After Xiao Xian ran to the training ground, he chose a mountain and carried a stone. He ran from the foot of the mountain to the top. On the way, he looked for a good stone and started to dig it. Fortunately, I have such a special ability. Xiao Xian looked at the different shades of gray in his vision and sighed. Compared to the totemic power, Xiao Xian's other ability undoubtedly helped him a lot. It saved him a lot of time and effort to find it. Xiao Xian could not dig a middle or upper grade stone. If he hit it with his bare hands, it would hurt his own hands. After digging out the stone he liked, Xiao Xian looked at the sky. It was almost noon, so he carried the stone and ran back. He went back to the wooden house to eat something, and then went to Old Ku's place with the stone he dug out. In the afternoon, Xiao Xian arranged for him to learn how to make stone tools. Stone tools looked simple, but there were many skills involved. It was not just about knocking. First of all, you have to know how to identify the stone. Even stone cores of the same hardness may not be the same. Old Ku took out 2 similar stone cores and said. Xiao Xian watched as Old Ku directly knocked and peeled off one of them, while the other was heated and cooled. Old Ku explained to Xiao Xian the color change and cooling time of several kinds of stones after heating. Some stones would change in color and texture after being heated, while some would only change in texture, and some would have no reaction to the heating process at all. Sometimes, the temperature had to be controlled during heating. It was necessary to understand what temperature was the best for peeling and what temperature was not suitable for peeling. As for this temperature, without a precise instrument to measure it, he could only rely on his feelings and experience. For example, if Xiao Xian felt the same temperature, Old Ku would be able to tell which one was hotter just by touching it. Different stones have different reactions to different temperatures, heating times, cooling changes, and other characteristics. Old Ku placed one of the 2 stone cores he had just taken out above the fire. Holding a stone stick in each hand, he placed the stone core in the middle. The fire burned very brightly, as if it wanted to dry people out. Just by standing next to the fire for a short while, one would be covered in sweat. Old Ku's face was also covered in sweat, but his hands were still very steady. His movements of flipping the stone core were also very agile. Half an hour later, the stone core that was being heated above the fire turned from its original grayish-white color to a reddish-brown color. Old Ku then took the stone core away from the fire. However, he did not start peeling off the stone leaves. Instead, he waited for the stone core to cool down and the reddish-brown color to lighten before he began peeling off the pieces. The peeled stone leaves, whether they were slender or round, were almost the same thickness. What kind of control was needed to achieve this? At least in Xiao Xian's previous opinion, without advanced cutting tools, it would be impossible to achieve this level. The so-called ideal polishing was actually a very complicated process. Those who did not understand it would not be able to imagine it at all. After the theory came practice. Xiao Xian spent most of the afternoon practicing peeling stone leaves. Too much trash. Again. What the hell are you peeling off? Again. Poor control of the strength of the hammer. Again. Wait. Can this stone be peeled off directly? Did you eat too much fish? Take it and burn it. Some people who lived closer to Old Ku all knew that Old Ku's temper had become worse recently. When they talked about Xiao Xian, they all shook their heads and sighed, "Xian, that poor child." In fact, the situation in the house was not as bad as the people in the tribe thought. Old Ku was not merciful with his words, but he still put a lot of effort into teaching Xiao Xian the skills of peeling, so he was willing to part with the stone cores. Xiao Xian knocked off 5 stone cores in one afternoon. Not counting the one he brought, the other 4 were Old Ku's own. The stones were not bad, so it was a waste to use them as practice stones. Old Ku did not feel sorry for Xiao Xian, but he felt ashamed of himself. Every day, Xiao Xian returned to his wooden house tiredly from Old Ku's place. His muscles were stinging, and the pain was getting more and more intense. Setting up a stone pot and lighting a fire was painful enough to make him grit his teeth. The area between his thumb and index finger was even more painful. He held the stone hammer even more tightly. It took him several tries to set up the stone pot successfully. Xiao Xian felt like the one being hammered wasn't the stone core, but himself. However, he slept very well that night, and when he woke up, his whole body felt refreshed, as if the muscle pain from yesterday was just an illusion. Xiao Xian did not know if this was a totemic warrior's own ability, or another special ability. Early in the morning, Xiao Xian planned to go to the training ground as usual. Yesterday, he saw a place with good stones. He could dig out some good stone cores. This way, he would not have to use Old Ku's stones all the time. What if he made Old Ku poor? As he walked, Xiao Xian felt that something was wrong. People who were not so active usually got up early and gathered in the same direction. After thinking for a while, Xiao Xian patted his forehead. He almost forgot. Today was the day that Lang Jie and the others went out to hunt. Xiao Xian took Caesar to the place where the crowd gathered. There was a road from the foot of the mountain to the top of the mountain, almost in a straight line. This road was higher than other places, and no one had built a house on it. The hunting team would pass through this road when they went out or came back, so they would not disturb the other residents in the tribe. Over time, this path also took on a different meaning. People in the tribe called it the Path of Glory. It was like a grand farewell to warriors who were about to go to the battlefield. People had mixed feelings. Some were proud, some were heavy, and some were hopeful. They did not know if their families were still safe when the hunting team came back. Would they be able to bring back enough food? Most of the people gathered on both sides of the Path of Glory were the families of the warriors who went out this time, from the elderly to the children. When the hunting team came back, these people would be here to welcome them. And the two times, their feelings would be completely different. However, besides welcoming and sending off the hunting team, for the warriors in the hunting team, this road also represented a kind of meaning. It was an affirmation of their own strength. If Xiao Xian were to describe it, for many warriors, this road was a road to show off their wealth. When they came back from the hunt, it was clear who got how much food, just like the disclosure of assets. Rich people naturally did not lack reputation, status, or women. These were all things worth showing off. "They're coming!" someone shouted. Xiao Xian looked over. There were about 200 people coming down from the mountain, and the one walking at the front was the leader of the hunting team. Xiao Xian had seen him on the night of the sacrificial ceremony. Not only the leader, but also several people behind the leader, Xiao Xian also felt familiar. They were all the people who danced by the fire pit that night. The people walking down the mountain, no matter if they were smiling or looking serious, each of their steps was full of momentum, like a general on the battlefield. At the back of the team, among the tall warriors, several children who were obviously shorter than the others were very eye-catching. Among them were the leader's grandson, Mao, and Fei, who had shown off in front of Xiao Xian before. "Hey, who are those children?" "Of course, they are strong enough to join the first hunting team. They are the best among the awakened warriors this year." "Hey, is that Mao? No wonder he is the leader's grandson." The crowd was talking about it. Sai's father pointed at Fei and the others in the hunting team, and said to Sai, "Look, they are about the same age as you, and awakened in the same batch. They can join the first hunting team. What about you?" Sai straightened his neck. "Why don't you live on the mountain?" Sai's father choked, and directly threw 2 punches and 2 slaps at him. "You're tuning into the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.